Chapter 545. A body that was only slightly taller than an ordinary human had actually turned into an active volcano. Black and thick smoke continuously rose from the corpse. However, under the cleansing of the multicolored light, the smoke only rose a few meters before it was completely dispersed by the flames and disappeared without a trace. After an unknown amount of time, the figure completely disappeared, and the tens of thousands of rays of sunlight that filled the sky gradually faded, and the world became real again. Han Jin slowly exhaled a long breath. His efforts over the past few months had not been in vain. Without the yin-yang amplification formation, none of them would have been able to leave this place alive. Speaking of which, he really had to thank Catherine. Without her threat, Han Jin would not have thought of setting up the yin-yang amplification formation. Without her reminder, Han Jin would not have been able to make the decision to change the formation in time. The situation at the time was too critical. If Han Jin had been just a little bit slower, the outcome would have been completely different. Thinking of this, Han Jin turned to look at Catherine, and happened to meet her complicated gaze. Han Jin gave her a friendly smile and walked toward where Jadius and Adolf were. In Han Jin's eyes, the yin-yang amplification formation's dazzling scene was not surprising. If there was enough vital energy to support him to set up the cosmic star formation, or the legendary transmute demon formation that could slaughter all demons in the world, perhaps it would have been much easier for him. However, the others were greatly shocked. Han Jin's magic that could change the world with just a wave of his hand could no longer be called magic. It could be described as a miracle. Catherine stared at Han Jin in a daze, and she did not know what to feel. Although Han Jin's strength had already attracted her attention, it was only attention. She did not expect that in just a few months, this young man would undergo such a drastic change. Of all the people present, no one knew better than Catherine what kind of existence that figure was. The avatar of the god of death, the projection of Hamas in this world, had disappeared just like that. At the moment of life and death, with her extremely sharp intuition, she believed that since the magic formation set up by Han Jin could even imprison her, it should also pose a threat to the god of death, Hamas. Therefore, she placed her hope on Han Jin. However, when what she hoped for really happened, her feelings became extremely complicated. Why? This young man's strength was obviously not as strong as hers, but the magic he released could not even be blocked by the god of death? Even when facing the Angel of Dominion, Alpha, she had never taken a step back. But looking at this young man, she felt a sense of fear in her heart. Who on earth was he? Han Jin's image in Catherine's eyes had undergone a drastic change. Before this, the only use of Han Jin for Catherine was that he might be able to unlock the seal in Lenin's body. It was because of Lenin that Catherine was here. Otherwise, with Catherine's temperament, how could she care about a mere Holy Crown city? But now, Catherine had every reason to suspect that Han Jin deliberately unlocked Lenin's seal. Imagine, how could a powerful existence that could even defeat the avatar of the god of death be hindered by a small seal? Alpha, the Angel of Dominion, was indeed powerful, but he could not be compared with a real god. At this time, Lenin floated to Catherine's side and asked with concern, "How are you?" "I'm fine." Catherine glanced at Lenin, slowly shook her head, and then turned her eyes to Han Jin. In her opinion, everything that Han Jin did should have a deeper meaning. As for why he refused to unlock Lenin's seal, Catherine could not think of a reason no matter how hard she thought about it. Of course, Han Jin didn't know that his image in Catherine's mind had been greatly upgraded. A simple matter had been greatly complicated by the fallen angel. He smiled and stood in front of Jadius. After carefully observing him, he nodded and said with relief, "Fortunately, we came in time." Jadius's face was pale, but he seemed to be in good spirits. He smiled and said, "Sir, if I had known that you would come back, I would not have worked so hard." Han Jin could not help but laugh. Just as he was about to speak, he found that Adolf had unknowingly run behind him. Adolf's expression was serious, and his body was straight as a javelin. The fanaticism and reverence in his eyes could be seen even by a child. Han Jin could not help but have a headache. He did not know what to say to Adolf. After thinking about it, he decided not to say anything and let him continue to misunderstand. A clear cry came from the sky, and Bao Bao's figure quickly flew over from a distance. Before it could reach the ground, Yelena released a levitation spell and flew towards Han Jin. Bao Bao was startled, and then hurriedly chased after her, but its expression was a little depressed. She nervously looked at Han Jin from head to toe. Seeing that Han Jin was fine, Yelena was relieved. She turned her head and glared at Bao Bao. Bao Bao immediately moved a few steps to the side, looking frightened. It even raised its wings in front of its body, carefully observing Yelena's expression from time to time. "What's wrong?" Han Jin asked, amused. How did this fearless immortal bird become so sneaky? She looked like a child who had done something bad. "It's all because of it," Yelena said angrily. "It only knows how to run. I didn't help at all. If something happened to you..." At this point, Yelena's voice was choked with sobs. All right. Look at me, aren't I doing well?" Han Jin hurriedly comforted her. "That monster is indeed very powerful. It's normal for Bao Bao to be scared. It's still young." As soon as Han Jin's voice fell, Bao Bao immediately moved over and rubbed against Yelena's back, trying to please her. It turned out that Bao Bao actually understood Han Jin's words. It really understood. Yelena glared at Bao Bao a few more times, but in the end she was tickled by Bao Bao and could not help but laugh. Seeing that it was effective, Bao Bao rubbed even more vigorously, and the two of them became a mess. "Powerful? It's more than powerful," Jed said, looking at Han Jin carefully. "You really don't know?" Han Jin was stunned. "Know what?" As soon as this sentence came out, everyone looked at Han Jin strangely. This time, even Adolf could not help but say, "Sir, Soul Chain is a spell that can only be released by a god." Han Jin opened his mouth. Although he looked calm and collected, he was shocked. Did I just kill a god? However, after thinking about it, it seemed unlikely. The power of the yin-yang amplification formation was not bad, but it was a bit exaggerated to say that it could kill a god. However, when he looked at the expressions of the people around him, they all seemed to think that he should know. For a moment, he did not know what to say. "Your Excellency Raphael, I really can't see through you." Catherine and Lenin walked over. "Are you worried about something?" Someone who can kill a clone of the Death God doesn't know about the Soul Chain?" So it was a clone. Han Jin suddenly understood. He knew that the yin-yang amplification formation would not be able to reach that level. Under the teachings of Solomon, he knew very well what kind of power the gods of this world had. According to the standards of the cultivators of the other world, Death God Hamas should be equivalent to a Daluo immortal, or even higher. The yin-yang amplification formation could deal with Earth immortals, but to kill a Daluo immortal was purely a dream. However, if that was the case, what kind of power would be needed to kill a real god? Han Jin almost asked Catherine how the clone's strength compared to the main body, but after thinking about it, he decided against it. If he really did ask, these people would probably look at him strangely. Han Jin coughed and pretended not to hear Catherine's words. He asked Jeds, "How are our casualties?" Jed sighed. "The casualties are not very high, but the magic crystal reserve you left behind is almost used up. Let's go and have a look." Han Jin did not care about the others' reactions and walked straight into the Holy Crown City. Jeds and Adolf looked at each other, but neither of them spoke. They followed behind Han Jin. Catherine was silent for a moment at the side. Suddenly, she smiled inexplicably and pulled Lenin, who was beside her, to follow them. The scene in the city was extremely miserable. There were ruins and rubble everywhere, and there were corpses everywhere. But most of the corpses were hellhounds and minotaurs. Catherine's earth-shattering blow had destroyed a large part of the city wall. The broken bricks and stones covered the fierce battle that had once taken place here, but the black-red liquid that flowed out from the cracks was enough to prove the extent of the tragedy at that time. When they passed by the city wall, all the people of the Holy Crown City group glanced at Catherine at the same time. There was no other reason, but this was too fierce. You know, the wall was made of corundum, and you destroyed it with just one blow? Catherine, the initiator, did not feel anything. She just casually walked past, not caring about the gazes of others at all. At this time, Guevara came out of the city. He did not participate in the god-level battle outside the city, but it was more than enough to deal with some of the hellhounds and minotaurs that broke into the city. Han Jin smiled and greeted him. He always had a special feeling for this old man. "How are you?" Han Jin stood in front of Guevara and looked at the old man's gray temples. He had a lot of things to say, but in the end, he just asked softly. "Good, what's wrong with me?" Guevara laughed and patted Han Jin's shoulder heavily. "You are also very good, really, Raphael, you are very good." Someone had already reported the battle outside the city to Guevara. Of course, Guevara was not as ignorant as Han Jin about the terrifying magic of the soul chain. The young man in front of him had already stood at a height that even he had to look up to. He had defeated the avatar of the death god in a short time. This had a great impact on Guevara. He wanted to look up to the sky and laugh, but even that was not enough to vent the excitement in his heart. In terms of the result of this battle, Han Jin was already standing at the top of the world. Even Nicholas, the Emperor of Magnificent Light, who gave Donald a lot of headaches, was overshadowed. Nothing could make Guevara feel more gratified than this. For the past few years, Han Jin had grown little by little, and all of this had happened under Guevara's watch. For the first time, Guevara sincerely hoped that he could live for a few more years to see Han Jin succeed with his own eyes. Jed's suddenly pointed to the sky in surprise. "What's with that teleportation array?" Everyone looked in the direction of Jed's finger. The round mirror made of white light was still quietly hovering in the sky. "This is the magic array we used to teleport here," Han Jin replied, a little puzzled by Jed's tone. "I know it's a magic array." Jed's was a little excited. "But why isn't it disappearing?" Hearing Jed's words, Catherine looked up and couldn't help but feel puzzled. A teleportation array was nothing special. As long as there were enough magic crystals and time, it could be completed. The problem was that a teleportation array usually lasted between 10 seconds to 10 minutes. Now that such a long time had passed, the light of the array still hadn't disappeared. This was somewhat unreasonable. "Haha, this is Mr. Zhenglin's masterpiece." Speaking of this teleportation array, Han Jin's mood was incomparably good. With this, he could shuttle between various battlefields at will. He no longer had to worry about being in a dangerous situation and not being able to get there in time. "Zhenglin?" Jed's was stunned for a moment, then laughed. "No wonder this guy always gives us unexpected surprises. How long can this magic array last?" Guevara's attention was also attracted. "That depends on the situation," Han Jin pondered for a moment, then slowly said. "What situation?" Jed's and Guevara asked in unison. This was too important. The longer the magic array lasted, the greater its effect. Even Catherine and Lennon stopped talking and looked over in unison. They were also very curious. Han Jin looked at everyone's expressions and couldn't help but laugh. If no one destroys it, then it can always be used. Or, the god of war will turn off the teleportation array. "What? What?" Cries of surprise rang out everywhere. Even the taciturn Lennon couldn't help but join the crowd. After Mr. Zhenglin saw the Hell's Gate set up in the Freedom Federation, he received inspiration and made changes to the normal teleportation array. Han Jin wasn't surprised by their reaction at all. When this magic matrix was successfully constructed, Zhenglin had confidently said that it was definitely a milestone in the field of space magic for human beings. "Wait." Guevara pulled Han Jin back. There's a Hell's Gate in the Freedom Federation? Yes. Han Jin nodded. Otherwise, we would have already dealt with the matter over there. Guevara frowned. Hell's Gate? That meant that the Abyss army could continuously step on the ground from there. He couldn't even imagine what kind of scene it would be. It doesn't matter, Han Jin said with a smile. If we hadn't learned that Prince Johnson was going to attack the Holy Crown City and had no choice but to rush back, I think we would have already destroyed the Hell's Gate. It's not that simple. Guevara slowly shook his head, then looked deeply at Han Jin. He was very clear in his heart that the great demon Donald's purpose of building the Hell's Gate wasn't just to transport the Hellhounds and Minotaurs. There would definitely be some important figures appearing there. Catherine muttered to herself, "It seems that Donald's situation is very bad." Catherine had every reason to say so. Since Donald sent his younger brother, Prince Johnson, to attack the Holy Crown City, which was not a famous city, it could be seen that the Abyss race didn't gain any advantage on the battlefield of the Freedom Federation. In the battle under the Holy Crown City, Johnson and more than a dozen great demons under his command were all killed. It was definitely an unbearable blow to Donald. At this moment, Catherine still didn't know that Donald's several sons had all died in the hands of Han Jin. If she knew, then she would have said this sentence with a very positive tone. That is to say, you can teleport back at any time through this magic array? Guevara asked. That's not all. Han Jin winked with a smile. What else? Guevara and Jeds were both stunned. Moreover, this teleportation magic array has the ability of two-way teleportation. Yelena smiled. As a Grand Magus, she knew better than Han Jin where the most exciting changes were. If you are willing, you can visit the Freedom Federation at any time. Miss Yelena, are you sure you are not joking? Jeds, who had always been gentle and elegant, opened his eyes wide. Two-way teleportation arrays were not rare, but it was necessary to set up the same teleportation array on the other side. For a teleportation array to have the ability of two-way teleportation, it was too shocking. Let's go to the Freedom Federation? Han Jin said with a smile. After Han Jin said this, everyone present, except for those who had just returned with Han Jin, was dumbfounded. A two-way teleportation magic array. What did this mean? There was no doubt that if what Han Jin said was true, then it meant that from today on, as long as there was an accurate magic array, Han Jin and his army would have a powerful mobility, and could shuttle back and forth between various battlefields at any time. In the face of such an elusive army, who could stop them? Catherine's expression became complicated again. Although she was always alone wherever she went and didn't like to be followed by others, or rather, she disdained to borrow the power of others, it didn't mean that she didn't understand the significance of a two-way spatial teleportation array. Just as Xing Jelen had said, this was a milestone for mankind. Go to the Freedom Federation? Jeds was interested. Okay. Guevara nodded. He also agreed with this suggestion. Dominique, you stay here and clean up the battlefield. Han Jin said, let's go. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 546. Annihilating more than a dozen great demons at once was a glorious victory. All creatures had to follow fixed laws, and so did the supergrade creatures. Among all the supergrade creatures, except for angels, all creatures had to reproduce through sex. Although the characteristics of the supergrade creatures were very different, they all had one thing in common. They all had extremely long lifespans. From a certain point of view, the laws of nature were fair. The supergrade creatures had a long lifespan, so their ability to reproduce was relatively weaker. To put it bluntly, if human beings had the same reproductive ability as supergrade creatures, perhaps human beings would have already perished. On the other hand, if supergrade creatures had the same reproductive ability as human beings, then human beings would have perished, and the whole world would have been crowded with supergrade creatures. The population of the demon race was not large to begin with. After subtracting half of the female demons, the old demons who were aging and could not bear the fierce battle, and the imps, there were only so many demon warriors. The number of great demons was even more limited. Including Donald's children, Han Jean had killed nearly 20 great demons. Nicholas was not idle either. With all the losses added together, it could be said that Donald had suffered an unimaginable blow. No one knew how Donald would react. Anyway, the Holy Crown City and Esnearly City were jubilant, and the big shots were busy visiting each other. At least they had to be familiar with each other, right? The teleportation circle on the God of War was never idle. After a while, Jedis and Guevara came over, but after a while, they went back because they still had things to deal with in the Holy Crown City. After a while, Kemerazzi, Honduras, and Thorn of the South went over, and after a while, they came back, but one person was missing. Thorn of the South was missing. The patriarchs of the Tribal Alliance thought that there was a problem with the teleportation circle, and Thorn of the South was lost in the endless space. Kemerazzi and Honduras did not know where Thorn of the South went. The only thing they were sure of was that Thorn of the South did not enter the teleportation circle with them. When Han Jean heard this, he hurriedly asked Sunir to investigate. While they were busy, Thorn of the South came back and said that he was invited to a very luxurious bar by a man named Hollister. He also described with spittle flying everywhere that there were countless beauties and countless fine wines. As the saying goes, when fighting a tiger, one's own blood brothers should go into battle as father and son. Thorn was too embarrassed to enjoy life alone in the southern heaven, so he specially came back to gather his friends. The chiefs of the Tribal Alliance were overjoyed, and the tense atmosphere disappeared in an instant. They swarmed up and disappeared into the space transmission matrix in the blink of an eye. Kyle Morazzi, Honduras, and the others were also curious. Besides, it would be beneficial for them to have more contact with Han Jin's people in the future. Only Zingreen could not smile. Although the teleportation circle did not need to be activated repeatedly, as long as the coordinates of the Holy Crown City were locked, the magic power would be consumed as long as someone passed through it. Although the magic crystal left by the demon contained extremely pure and huge space elements, it was still limited. If this went on, it would only take a few days to replace the space magic crystal. However, everyone was so happy that he could not stand out and be the bad guy, so he could only endure silently. Harley did not participate in the battle, but stayed in Esnearly City because he was depressed. He had to do something, or at least let others be depressed with him. However, Harley's position was a bit awkward. He had no right to give orders or criticize anyone, so he naturally turned his attention to Bao Bao. "Brother, I don't want to criticize you, but how could you do this? It's not right." Harley had reached the point of being heartbroken. "What are you afraid of? Even if you are afraid, you shouldn't run away. If you do this, who will dare to trust you in the future? Who will entrust their lives to you?" If Harley dared to scold him like this, Bao Bao would have pecked Harley's head full of holes. But now Bao Bao seemed to have realized his mistake. He lowered his head and looked very dispirited. "Harley!" Han Jean called. He felt sorry for Bao Bao. Among the magical beasts he had met, Bao Bao was the most human-like one. He was just like a child. "Master?" Harley hurried over. "That's enough. He was just born. Stop scolding him," Han Jean said. "Oh." Harley looked back at Bao Bao. He was in high spirits, and Han Jin's words were like pouring a bucket of cold water on his head, which made him feel very unwilling. At this moment, Domini walked out of the teleportation circle. She glanced around and walked slowly to Han Jean. "Sir, do you remember how many abyssal demons besieged the Holy Crown City?" Han Jean was stunned in thought for a moment. "About 13 or 14, including Prince Johnson." "Is it 13 or 14? Dominique asked again. "It should be 14, Yelena answered from the side. That's strange. Domini showed a puzzled look. What's wrong? We searched back and forth on the battlefield several times. Domini took a cloth bag from her waist and bent over to put it on the table, but we only found 12 space magic crystals in total. Han Jin suddenly remembered that after Prince Johnson's body had mutated, Catherine had attacked with all her strength. However, only half of the abyssal demons that he had sealed with the suppress formula had been killed by him and Yelena, while the rest had been swept away by the shockwave. After that, he had focused all his attention on the residence of the god of death and had no time to care about the abyssal demons. So, 1 or 2 abyssal demons escaped? Han Jin frowned deeply. If he guessed correctly, when the pure yang formation was formed, the abyssal demon had just woken up from its coma and quietly escaped when it saw that the situation was bad. The other demons that did not wake up in time were either killed by the pure yang formation, or they woke up too late and were too seriously injured to escape. Speaking of dealing with the abyssal demons, although the yin and yang formation was not as effective as the light magic, it still had great and terrible lethality. Raphael, can I go back and look for him? Yelena volunteered. No need. Han Jin shook his head slowly. After such a long time, he must have escaped or hidden somewhere. It's hard for us to catch him. But, the secret of the magic formation. Yelena showed an anxious look. It's not a big deal. Han Jin said. If they don't dare to target the Holy Crown City from now on, it will be better for us. What's more, their knowledge is very limited. Even those dead abyssal demons don't know much. It's good that you're confident. Han Jin smiled, picked up the cloth bag put down by Domini, and poured out the space magic crystals inside. With a crisp sound of collision, 12 magic crystals that were almost transparent and full of light piled up on the table. Just now, Green was distressed about the meaningless consumption of the teleportation formation. Seeing so many magic crystals, he immediately walked over and stared at them. There were still 6 space magic crystals in Han Jin's space ring. Seeing Green's expression, Han Jin smiled knowingly. After calculating for a while, he picked up 4 space magic crystals and pushed the rest to Green. Mr. Green, I'll leave them to you. Han Jin said. Sir, don't you also need these magic crystals? Green was stunned and then asked. 10 are enough for me. The rest are useless to me, so I'd better give them to you. Okay. Green didn't continue to refuse, and neatly put away all the magic crystals. At this moment, Sunir's figure walked out of the teleportation matrix. She had gone to look for Thorn in the south of the heavens. After looking for him for a long time, she found out that he had been invited to the Night of Bliss by Hallister. This kind of undisciplined behavior made her feel helpless. Of course, Thorn in the south of the heavens wasn't a member of the organization at the moment, so he wasn't under her control. She had no choice but to give Ronning a few words of advice before rushing back. According to his habit, every time he saw a figure walking out of the teleportation formation, Green's eyebrows would quickly wrinkle. But now, he looked at Sunir with a big smile. As the saying goes, as long as there is food, there is no need to panic. The teleportation formation didn't have much energy, and the others didn't care about the consumption at all. Of course, Green was distressed. He had just obtained 8 top-grade space magic crystals, which were enough to support the teleportation formation for a long time. Raphael, that guy Thorn of the South was invited to the blissful night by Hallister. Sunir said. I know. Thorn of the South just came back and called all the chiefs away. Han Jin laughed. They. Sunir was speechless for a moment. Haha, they will definitely have an eye-opener. Harley laughed strangely. Forget it. Morrison's continued. Esnearly City is much bigger than Holy Crown City, and richer. Besides, Esnearly City is the capital of the Freedom Confederation. What haven't they seen? Sir, we really don't have a place like the blissful night here. Bauer smiled bitterly. Since both Kemerazzi and Honduras had left, There must be someone here who could coordinate with Han Jin. In case of any accident, they would be able to respond immediately. Of course, Bauer was the best candidate. Are you kidding? Really, we don't. Only some small bars. Bauer said, and then he explained. In fact, the social distribution of Esnearly City was not much different from that of Holy Crown City. More than 90% of the wealth in Esnearly City was in the hands of the authorities, nobles, and professionals. However, Esnearly City's administrative facilities were different. The key was the House of Lords. All the representatives in the House of Lords were nobles. Every 3 years there would be a round of elimination in which 11 representatives would be kicked out, just like a sports league in another world. Then, new nobles would be elected to fill the vacancies. The right to choose who to eliminate and who to keep was in the hands of the commoners. The commoners would always choose the meanest, trickiest, and least reputable representative. Because of this, for the commoners, life in the Freedom Confederation was far better than in other places. Being kicked out of the center of power was not a good life. Losing their power, they could only barely survive by rent. And since you were kicked out, it meant that the commoners hated you the most. The consul and other representatives of the House of Lords would not hesitate to add insult to injury. On one hand, they could establish their own glorious image, and on the other hand, they could divide the wealth of the nobles who had lost their power. The fights between the nobles were often life or death. In sharp contrast, the commoners lived a happy and harmonious life. In times of great calamity and chaos, the representatives would donate money and goods in order to win over the hearts of the people. If they donated a lot and suffered a great loss, it would not be a big deal. If they could protect their position, they could get it back. If they donated too little, they would be hated by others. Not only would they not be able to get back what they donated, their original wealth might even belong to someone else as they lost their power. Under these circumstances, the nobles would naturally avoid 2 types of business. The first was food. If the price of food was set too low, they would not make a profit. If the price was set too high, they would definitely lose their position. In times of disaster, their situation would be even more miserable. Other people would donate money and goods to other businesses. If you hoarded so much food, would you dare not to use it to help the people? There was also a bar that symbolized debauchery. There was a popular saying in the Freedom Federation, a man who wasn't loyal to his wife couldn't possibly be loyal to his country or his own people. Aristocrats had always tried every possible means to show off their splendor and grandeur, keeping themselves clean and honest. Asking them to open a bar? That was simply murdering for money. If they were exposed by hostile nobles, only death would await them. Without the support of the nobles, their business would not be able to expand. This created a very strange scene. In Esnearly City, small service establishments could be seen everywhere, but none of them were large. For example, the Lord of Holy Crown City, Dismark, had actually built a huge entertainment city. To the people of the Freedom Federation, this was inconceivable. Of course, there must be a very secret place for the nobles to have fun, but Bauer did not need to tell them. Moreover, the scale of those places would not be very big, and could not be compared to the Night of Bliss. Hearing Bauer's explanation, everyone was dumbfounded. They could not understand. How could the commoners decide the fate of the nobles? If so, what was the point of the nobles' hard work and the professionals' hard work? Once they could not gain the approval of the commoners, they would be abandoned by society. Sir, it seems, the Freedom Federation and us have too many areas that do not match. We should be more careful in the future to avoid conflicts. Seeing that Han Jin was not paying attention to him and seemed to be sitting there in a daze, Zenglin slightly raised his voice. Sir? What are you thinking? Nothing. Han Jin raised his head and smiled. Perhaps, among the experts in the Holy Crown City, he was the only one who could understand the Freedom Federation. ***************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************** the situation seemed to be very calm. The flame tyrant Lonker was obviously scared by Han Jin. He led the evil fire spirits to wander around the Hell's Gate, and no longer had the intention to attack Esnearly City. The roles of the attacker and the defender had changed. Thorn of the South often sent out Wyvern Knight to investigate the situation of the Hell's Gate. Since the enemy had stopped attacking, the ground races naturally had to find a way to take the initiative. Kemoratsi and Honduras fully supported Thorn of the South's plan. The existence of the Hell's Gate was a thorn in the throat of the Freedom Federation. It had to be pulled out, otherwise they would always be threatened by the abyssal races. Thorn of the South also used facts to prove that he was not a man of action. In his speech, he always gave people the impression that he was careless, but in his actions, he was very cautious. He sent out no more than 10 Wyvern Knights at a time, not because he was worried that the Wyvern Knights would be killed, but because he didn't want to arouse the enemy's suspicion. Hundreds of Wyvern Knights constantly roamed around the Hell's Gate, undoubtedly telling the enemy that they had to be careful. They were preparing to attack, and were now trying to investigate their arrangements. According to the information sent back by the Wyvern Knights, the flame tyrant Lonker hadn't wasted his time in vain. Tens of thousands of individual bunkers had been dug in the mountains and hills of various sizes near the Hell's Gate. If the ones hiding inside were evil eyes, they would be able to form a net of fire covering the sky and earth. Any life form that approached would suffer unimaginable damage. Moreover, the Wyvern Knights sensed that the mana fluctuations near the Hell's Gate were very strong, and they also saw a large number of evil spirits. Clearly, the flame tyrant Lonker had received reinforcements and set up a large number of magic arrays near the Hell's Gate, preparing to welcome the counterattack of the Freedom Federation and the Tribal Alliance. If they really fought, it would definitely be a fierce battle. Thorn and the South had racked their brains for this. However, the people on Han Jin's side were somewhat cold. Han Jin himself had been hiding in his magic laboratory for several days, rarely coming out. This gave Kemoratsi and Honduras a headache. They knew that without Han Jin's cooperation, even the most exquisite plan would be useless. On this day, Han Jin was deep in thought in his magic laboratory when Harley's voice woke him up. "Master, what's the matter?" Han Jin asked with some displeasure. "Master, that Dragon Knight Dick came again. He asked me to give you this letter," Harley cautiously said outside the magic laboratory. "Come in." Han Jin paused. "Where is he?" "He's in the city hall chatting with Kemoratsi and the others." "The letter." "Here it is." Harley hurriedly handed over a letter. Han Jin took the letter and casually tore it open. Rather than calling it a letter, it was better to call it a note. There was no greeting, no greetings, only a line of characters. It was a short 2 sentences. "I changed my mind. This is a battle that belongs to us." A trace of a smile appeared on Han Jin's face. When he had first learned of Nicholas's plan, he had already made a decision. Although Adolf, Green, and the others were also very interested in Nicholas's plan, when the day came, he would not let Adolf and Green participate. Chapter 547. Ever since he received Nicholas' letter, Han Jin had never appeared again. Even Guevara and Jedis couldn't wait any longer and urged Harley to ask what was going on. However, the magic laboratory had been completely sealed off by Han Jin, and even Harley couldn't enter. Catherine was also anxious. The seal hidden in Lennon's body had always been a thorn in her heart, and the key to breaking the seal could only be obtained from Han Jin. However, Lennon didn't seem to care much about it. For him, being able to see Catherine again was already the greatest gift, and nothing else mattered. After Sunir and Yelena learned that Harley wouldn't be able to enter the room, they gave up their unnecessary worries. After all, Han Jin would be fine in his own magic laboratory. With nothing else to do, the two of them spent most of their time studying the new holy weapons they had just obtained. In the magic laboratory, Han Jin floated above the holy crystal. With the help of the holy crystal, The spatial elements contained in the 10 spatial magic crystals had long been extracted and condensed into a looming mist belt in the air. Every time Han Jin inhaled, the mist belt would slowly collapse into his body, and every time Han Jin exhaled, the mist belt would slowly spread out with him as the center, and the brilliant starlight would be completely covered by the mist belt. When Han Jin's exhalation reached its limit, he would temporarily stop breathing, and the mist belt would turn into a thick black mass along with Han Jin, the holy crystal, and the entire magic laboratory, as if they had never existed. Then, Han Jin would begin to inhale, and the mist belt would reappear and continue to collapse into his body, condensing into a very small dot. Han Jin was using the spatial elements to refine the Sumeru mustard seed. This was an extremely dangerous method. If one breath cycle was equivalent to one forging, the whole process would require 48,000 continuous forging, and it couldn't be interrupted or disrupted. If anyone rushed in and disturbed Han Jin at this time, it would lead to disastrous consequences. Han Jin maintained a very regular breathing rhythm. One exhale took about 3 seconds, one inhale took 3 seconds, and one stop took 4 seconds. In this way, it would take 6 days to complete 48,000 tempering cycles. One could only imagine how powerful his divine sense was to maintain a calm mind for 6 whole days. When Han Jin stepped on the deck and appeared in front of everyone again, 8 days had passed. However, not only was Han Jin not tired at all, he was even more energetic. As soon as Han Jin's figure appeared, everyone's eyes immediately focused on him. Of course, his friends knew that Han Jin was in seclusion training for the upcoming war, so they tried to find any changes in Han Jin. Han Jin glanced around and found that the deck was especially full of people today. Not only were Guevara, Jedis, and the others present, even Thorn and Tian Nan, who were enjoying themselves in the Holy Crown City, were sitting there. "I told you, you would never miss this opportunity." Guevara laughed. "Raphael, when are you leaving?" Han Jin walked to Guevara's side and sat down. "Today, I still have some things to take care of." "Today?" Guevara was surprised. "Yes, I'd rather be early than late. Otherwise, that Nicholas will think that I'm unworthy of my reputation." Han Jin laughed. Everyone laughed. At this time, Adolf slowly walked out from the crowd and went straight to Han Jin's side, standing there quietly. Seeing this scene, Jedis couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Even when the Pope was still alive, Adolf had never behaved like this. "You should at least leave some face for me." The Pope, however, in the eyes of others, Adolf's actions were understandable. If Han Jin needed it, they would not hesitate to stand behind Han Jin respectfully like Adolf. A person who could kill the avatar of death was fully qualified to receive the corresponding respect. "Who are you going to take with you?" Guevara asked the question that everyone was concerned about. There was no doubt that Han Jin would face an extremely fierce battle, and the danger was self-evident. However, such a battle was the most desirable thing for powerhouses. Adolf's body straightened even more. Catherine slowly stood up from her seat. Under such circumstances, Han Jin might not be able to make any requests of her. No matter how powerful Han Jin was, he could not command a fallen angel like she was his subordinate. However, Catherine decided to participate in this battle that did not belong to her. She wanted to make sure that when Han Jin removed the seal in Lenin's body in the future, he would have no excuse to refuse. There was no such thing as a free lunch in the world, and Catherine knew this very well. The seal of Alpha, the archangel of authority, could not be easily broken by anyone. Even someone as strong as Han Jin would have to spend a lot of effort to do so. Therefore, Catherine needed to do something to increase her weight in Han Jin's heart. Han Jin looked at Catherine's expression and thought about Adolf behind him. He could not help but feel a headache coming on. After pondering for a long time, he said carefully, "I'm afraid that I won't be able to come back in a short time. In order to ensure the safety of this place, we must have sufficient defensive forces. So, I plan to go alone," Han Jin continued. As soon as he finished speaking, the hall suddenly fell silent. You mean? After a while, Guevara recovered from his shock. He looked a little confused and worried. Since Nicholas dares to take the risk alone, what am I afraid of? I can't guarantee anything else, but when it comes to escaping, I'm afraid that no one here can compare to me, right? Han Jin said with a smile. Didn't Nicholas say that he would lead a team of Dragon Knight to meet up with you? Zagreen asked in surprise. He changed his mind. Although everyone knew that Han Jin was telling the truth, no one could accept this result, especially Adolf. His wrinkled old face showed a rare expression of excitement. My lord! Adolf was very unwilling to accept this result. He looked at Han Jin with bright eyes. Catherine also spoke. Sir Raphael, you seem to have not realized one thing. There shouldn't be anyone here who is more familiar with the Abyss world than I am. Han Jin sighed. To be honest, I don't want to go alone either. But what if Donald sends another team of demons? Also, our enemies are not only the abyssal race. Perhaps this is a trap that Nicholas set for me. Have you thought about what would happen if we all left and Nicholas, Dragon City, and Dragon Realm sent powerhouses to attack us? Adolf was silent for a while, and in the end, he didn't say anything. Although Jed's overlapping spells were powerful, he was still a pure magician. Compared to Adolf, he was a bit weaker. In front of an opponent of Johnson's level, he was too dangerous. Catherine couldn't refute Han Jin's words. Adolf could only cause damage to the great abyssal demon, but if the demon wanted to escape, Adolf couldn't do anything about it. Of all the people on the deck, Catherine was the only one who had the ability to kill a demon, except for Han Jin. I'll leave this place to you, Han Jin said solemnly as he stood up slowly. After a short silence, Adolf said reluctantly, Don't worry, my lord. Although Catherine was disappointed, she could only accept the fact. She suddenly hoped that the demon would really attack them. That way, it would be much easier to ask Han Jin for help in the future. However, what Catherine didn't know was that Han Jin didn't remove the seal for Lenin because of some groundless reason. With Han Jin's current strength, he really couldn't do anything about the seal. After bidding farewell to the people on the deck and comforting Yelena and Sunir, whose eyes were red, Han Jin summoned Heavenly Tao and rushed out of the God of War. He drew a bright purple light in the air and stepped into the unknown battlefield. At the same time, the flame tyrant Lonker was sitting near the Hell's Gate. The magma flowing slowly under his body emitted a golden-red flame. The scorching heat caused the surrounding air and scenery to become distorted. With Lonker as the center, there were busy figures everywhere within a radius of dozens of miles. The construction of the magic circle was nearing completion. Donald's order was simple: guard the Hell's Gate. This behemoth, which took a huge amount of manpower and material resources to build, was the key for the abyssal race to set foot on the ground. There must be no mistakes. Although Lonker didn't dare to take the initiative to attack Esnearly City, he was completely confident that he could resist the human alliance with the surrounding terrain and a large number of magic circles. He believed that even if Raphael rushed here, he wouldn't dare to ignore the attack of the Flame Tyrant and forcefully destroy the Hell's Gate. That would be no different from suicide. After half a day, Han Jin had approached the defense area of the Abyssal Army. He suddenly turned his body and landed lightly on the ground. At the same time as Han Jin landed, a figure jumped out of the nearby forest. After a few flashes, he was already waiting there. Have you been waiting for me for a long time? Han Jin asked softly. Almost 6 days, Leonardo replied respectfully. 6 days? It seems that your efficiency is beyond my imagination. My lord, everything you want is here. Leonardo smiled and handed over a dark gray box. I haven't been idle these past few days. I wrote down everything I could think of. Many thanks, Han Jin said as he took the box. My lord, you're too polite. This is what I should do. Leonardo's answer was very standard and formal. He then hesitated for a moment. My lord, have you really decided? Yes. After a moment of daze, Leonardo sighed. My lord, I have to say that you have unparalleled bravery in the world. In my impression, there has never been a powerhouse who dared to, unparalleled in the world. Han Jin smiled and interrupted Leonardo's flattery. You're wrong. I have a companion. Leonardo was stunned. He asked tentatively, My lord, are you talking about Nicola? Han Jin didn't answer. He slowly opened the box and took out the item inside to carefully memorize it. Leonardo tactfully kept his mouth shut. He only spoke when Han Jin asked him something. Most of the time, he just stood there quietly. The sun slowly sank below the horizon. The dark night didn't affect Han Jin's vision. He continued to read and memorize. Time flew by quickly. Unknowingly, the sun rose from another direction. When the sun shone down, Han Jin slowly closed the book and put it back into the box. He then put the box back into his spatial ring and looked up at the sun in a daze. My lord, for all the races on the surface, sunlight is the most beautiful scenery, right? Leonardo smiled. You look at it every day. Isn't it enough? Don't you feel that the sun today is a bit special? Han Jin asked. Special? Leonardo was fooled. He looked up for a long time but couldn't see anything special. Fortunately, he had the blood of a black dragon. Otherwise, looking at the sun for so long would cause problems for his eyes. All right, let's stop here. Han Jin smiled. The rising sun was the signal he and Nicholas agreed to attack. Leonardo obviously didn't know. Leonardo, it's best if you find a place to hide for a while and wait for me to come back. Yes, my lord, Leonardo replied in a low voice. When the sun rose, the flame tyrant Lonker was patrolling the defensive line as usual. Suddenly, he saw the hellhounds in the distance start to become restless. A strange premonition appeared in Lonker's mind. Before Lonker could stand up to see what was going on, a purple light had already appeared in the sky. At this time, all the Abyss warriors stopped what they were doing and looked up at the sky. The evil eyes and Medusas immediately hid behind cover and prepared to fire. The Minotaurs and long-horned demons followed the purple light and quickly gathered in the direction of the gates of hell. There were even some evil spirits mixed in. When Lonker saw that it was only Han Jin who came, he couldn't help but be furious. This was utter contempt. Did that guy really think he could destroy the gates of hell by himself? You will pay for your actions today, Lonker said fiercely in his heart. His eyes were fixed on Han Jin, and the flames on his body burned even more fiercely. Han Jin's figure was getting closer and closer. All the Hell Warriors were nervously looking at the purple light in the sky. To them, Han Jin's existence was no longer as simple as a human. He was more like a curse that would take their lives. Han Jin was very fast. In the blink of an eye, he was only a few thousand meters away from the gates of hell. A Minotaur chief roared and threw out the giant axe in his hand. The cold glint of the axe spun in the air, like a bugle call to attack. Countless lights flashed on the nearby mountains. Faint red rays of light converged on Han Jin from all directions, weaving into a giant net that lit up the entire sky. In comparison, Han Jin, who was at the center of the net, looked a bit frail. Han Jin's figure had already disappeared from the sky, perfectly dodging those fatal rays. In the next moment, he appeared on the ground. The heavenly Tao had turned into a crescent moon blade that he held in his hand. A whip suddenly tore through the air, appearing from the dust in the sky. It drew a strange arc as it shot towards Han Jin's throat with unbelievable speed. This level of attack naturally could not do anything to Han Jin. Han Jin flicked his finger. His movement seemed slow, but it just happened to collide with the whip. The whip was like a long snake that had lost its strength. It trembled for a moment before softly falling to the ground. The long saber in Han Jin's hand glowed with purple light and swept out. A scream came from the dust and smoke, and a tall red figure stumbled in front of Han Jin. He was still holding a long whip in his hand, but he no longer had the strength to attack. Han Jin's saber had almost cut him in half, and a large amount of blood was gushing out from his chest and abdomen. Even so, the red figure still didn't fall down and stared at Han Jin with a pair of blood-red eyes. This was an evil spirit? Han Jin was somewhat surprised by the evil spirit's vitality, but this was just a trivial matter. Han Jin acted as if he did not see the other party's vicious gaze. He walked past the evil spirit and with a swing of his blade, he cut off the evil spirit's head and ended its pain. At this moment, the nearby minotaurs and long-horned demons reacted. They roared and charged at Han Jin. Han Jin's figure suddenly accelerated. The heavenly Tao in his hand scattered a resplendent light. Wails rang out everywhere. The minotaurs and long-horned demons' bodies were clearly incomparable to the evil spirits. As long as they were within the heavenly Tao's attack range, they were all cut in half. Every time the crescent blade was swung, there would be a rain of blood. Han Jin charged straight for the Hell's Gate in this rain of blood, leaving a long river of blood behind him. The flame tyrant Lonker stood in front of the gates of hell and watched as Han Jin massacred the minotaurs. However, he didn't dare to move. The deaths of a few minotaurs didn't matter, but the gates of hell couldn't be lost. Lonker could sense that Han Jin's target was not the minotaurs and long-horned demons, nor was it himself. It was the Hell's Gate behind him. Han Jin's speed was simply too fast. Whether it was the minotaurs or the evil spirits in front of him, none of them could stop him. In just a few breaths of time, Han Jin had slaughtered his way through the entire battle formation. If he went any further, he would reach Lonker's lava barrier. Han Jin slowly raised the crescent blade in his hand and pointed it at Lonker. He revealed a meaningful smile. At this moment, the mountains and hills near the Hell's Gate suddenly lit up. Faint red rays shot out from all directions. In the past, as long as Han Jin slaughtered his way into the enemy's formation, the evil eyes and Medusas would become mere decorations. He hid in the sea of people and slaughtered without restraint. The evil eyes and Medusas had no way of locking onto Han Jin, nor could they find a suitable angle to attack. The flame tyrant Lonker had spent so much effort to dig hundreds of thousands of holes in the nearby hills to prevent such a tragedy from happening again. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 548. If he had waited until he saw the rays before dodging, even someone as powerful as the fallen angel Kathleen might have lost her life on the spot. It was unavoidable, as no one could outrun the speed of light. Han Jin was well aware of the power of the Evil Eye's collective attack. His divine sense scanned the battlefield, and when he sensed the large group of Evil Eyes raising their antennae as if they had received some kind of order, he had already retreated underground. Countless rays fused together at the spot where Han Jin had disappeared. The pale red light condensed into a scorching white color at the center and rapidly expanded. More than a dozen long-horned devils and minotaurs couldn't dodge in time and were instantly swallowed by the light. Only a slight squeaking sound was left, followed by a scorching smell. Han Jin rose up from another place. With a swing of his long blade, a silk-like stream of light cut through a few long-horned demons around him. His gaze was still focused on the flame tyrant Longhorn, as if he was provoking him. If it was any other time, Longhorn would have already charged up in a rage. However, after staring blankly for a moment, Longhorn took a deep breath and forcefully suppressed the anger in his heart. He glared fiercely at Han Jin with his fiery eyes, but in the end, he did not take the initiative to attack. The only strange thing was that the lava ground beneath Longhorn's feet was burning even more fiercely, reflecting Longhorn's current mood. Han Jin smiled. His body suddenly rose from the ground, and his crescent moon blade slashed down with an unstoppable momentum towards Longhorn's head. His roar was like a thunderclap that resounded through the heavens. Longhorn! A dozen or so evil fire spirits roared as they blocked in front of Longhorn. At the same time, countless cracks suddenly appeared in the lava ground. Scorching hot golden red lava shot out from every crack, as if a dense group of flame pythons had appeared out of thin air. Lonker roared furiously. The flames on his body were so bright that they were dazzling. The surrounding temperature suddenly rose. As long as he was in this lava barrier, he would not be afraid of being injured. Lonker had already made up his mind that he would not retreat even half a step. Even if he was chopped into pieces, he would leave something on Han Jin's body. That was indeed the case. If Han Jin were to disregard everything and slash down with his saber, he would definitely deal some damage to Lonker. However, he would not be in a good condition either. Putting aside the fact that the lava barrier was so hot that it could melt steel, Lonker's strength was not to be underestimated. However, something unexpected happened. Han Jin's charging figure suddenly disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already behind Lonker. In other words, Han Jin's current position was between Longhorn and the Hell's Gate. As long as he took another step forward, he would be able to enter the Hell's Gate. Longhorn, who had gathered all his strength in preparation for a fatal blow, realized that he had been fooled. Although he did not know what Han Jin's goal was, he did not have the time to think about it. Two large fists covered in flames whistled towards Han Jin. Longhorn believed that even if Han Jin had the ability to teleport, he would not be able to dodge his attack while attacking the Hell's Gate. Reality once again disappointed the flame tyrant. Han Jin gave Longhorn a mocking smile. He did not make any movements to attack. He only took a step forward and disappeared into the Hell's Gate. Longhorn's fists continued to smash forward. The only difference was that his target had suddenly changed to the Hell's Gate. This sudden turn of events gave Longhorn a fright. He had to use all his strength to stop his attack. However, in the next moment, Longhorn could no longer suppress his anger. The smile on Han Jin's face before he disappeared was like a sharp blade that constantly cut into Longhorn's bleeding nerves. That was a smile that contained contempt, and mockery. Longhorn was so depressed that he wanted to howl at the sky. Was he such an insignificant existence in the eyes of the other party? Longhorn stared blankly at the Hell's Gate. After a while, he realized a serious fact. Han Jin had entered the Hell's Gate. All of the abyssal races stood there in a daze. They looked at the place where Han Jin had disappeared. They all had the same question in their minds. What was that Raphael trying to do? On the other side of the Hell's Gate was a vast and boundless plain. Unlike the plains in other parts of the abyss, this was a world of fiery red. Wave after wave of fire elemental storms constantly blew against the ground. The soil underfoot was also very strange. Not only was it abnormally solid, but it was also a translucent red. Looking down from above, the entire plain looked like a huge ruby. In the center of the plain was an ancient castle-like building that was nearly 100 meters tall. It was neither too big nor too small, about 7 or 8 square kilometers. The castle was also a translucent red that blended in with the soil. On the east and west sides of the castle were 2 Hell's Gates. Han Jin's figure appeared from the Hell's Gate in the east. At first, his eyes were somewhat blank. This was the aftereffect of forcefully passing through the Hell's Gate. The spatial turbulence would have a certain effect on the spiritual power of life. In the next moment, Han Jin returned to normal. He slowly scanned his surroundings. There were corpses everywhere. Near the Hell's Gate, on the plain, and on the castle walls, there was blood and corpses everywhere. The color of the blood was very fresh, as if there had just been a cruel massacre. In the west side of the Hell's Gate, there was a lonely figure sitting there. He also noticed Han Jin. He slowly raised his head, and his sharp eyes instantly pierced through the red mist and nailed onto Han Jin's face. "Raphael?" A voice filled with indifference was heard. "Nicola," Han Jin said softly. "You're late." Han Jin smiled and slowly walked forward. A pair of old enemies, the masters of the North and South Poles of the world, or perhaps the future rulers, actually met in the Abyss world. Sometimes, fate was just too humorous. It was also because of this specific environment that they were destined not to have a conflict, at least not for the time being. Neither of them answered. Rather than saying that they were confirming each other's identity, it was better to say that they were greeting each other because no one else could barge in except for them. Closer, the two sides were getting closer and closer. Han Jin saw a shallow but very obvious scar on Nicola's left cheek. He remembered that he had never heard Jed's mention it before. Obviously, this scar was left recently. Han Jin suddenly had a strange feeling in his heart, and then he shifted his gaze. Nicola also turned his gaze to his feet at the same time. Both of them had black hair and black eyes, but their appearances and temperaments were completely different. Han Jin was very handsome, and could even be described as handsome. If the armor was replaced with a gorgeous robe, and the crescent blade was replaced with a crystal-clear wine glass, Han Jin would not look like a powerhouse who held the power of life and death in his hands. He should be a beautiful young man who was used to socializing in luxurious banquets, spreading his talent, nobility, and perhaps even the seeds of love. On the other hand, the lines on Nicola's face were very firm. At first glance, one could tell that he was a tough man, especially the new scar on his left cheek. It added a sense of vicissitudes to him, and it also highlighted the power of looking down on the world. From time to time, a cynical smile would appear at the corner of his mouth, but it made his coldness and power suddenly become vivid. Without this smile, the silent Nicola was very much like a lifeless statue, or perhaps he was just putting on an act. But with this smile, Nicola seemed to be full of spirit, and it also made him seem more approachable. "What are you waiting for?" Han Jin saw that Nicola still had no intention of getting up and asked softly. "Waiting for you, and also waiting for Donald." Nicola raised his head again. "But he's obviously not as good as you. After waiting for a long time, he still doesn't dare to come in. If I knew that you were waiting for me, maybe I wouldn't have come in." Han Jin smiled. When he just stepped through the teleportation portal, he felt a sense of spatial disorientation. Although it was very short, less than a second, for a real powerhouse, a second was enough to determine life and death. "Why did you take so long?" Nicola also revealed a smile. "Did you think that I wouldn't be able to break through Donald's blockade so easily?" "I'm indeed a little surprised." Han Jin was too lazy to lie. There was no point in deliberately belittling Nicola. On the contrary, it would only show that he was at a disadvantage. "The answer is there." Nicola stretched out his hand and pointed diagonally. Han Jin raised his eyes. His telepathic thoughts were already operating to the limit. Facing Nicola, he had to maintain a high level of vigilance. In fact, both sides knew that the cooperation was only temporary. If the war ended with the defeat of the surface races, then there would be nothing to talk about. If they could defeat Donald, then there would definitely be a life-and-death battle between them, or even a war. And Nicola's right hand was hanging by his waist, only a few inches away from the hilt of his sword. With his sitting posture, it would be more convenient to use his right hand to point in the direction, but he chose to use his left hand. His right hand seemed to be reluctant to move. This could only mean two things. One was that he was guarding against Han Jin, and the other was that he had evil intentions. Of course, the possibility of the former was 90%. To be able to create the magnificent light empire, Nicola should know how to choose. At least in the situation where the war wasn't clear, he shouldn't kill each other. This was a kind of acknowledgement. With Han Jin's current strength, no one dared to ignore his existence. At this moment, the two poles of the world, the two great powerhouses with distinct barriers, were abiding by the same principle. One must always be vigilant against others. A white battle dress jumped into Han Jin's eyes, and then a figure shot towards Han Jin and Nicola like lightning. Enkiel? Han Jin was shocked. You don't seem to welcome me? Enkiel's smile was extremely beautiful and charming. That perfect face once again made Han Jin absent-minded, but he quickly came back to his senses. He looked at Nicola, then at Enkiel, and slightly raised his eyebrows. Why would Nicola and Enkiel be together? Could it be that they had already discussed a series of plans? Then, in their plans, did they also discuss how to deal with him? Your Excellency Nicola, it seems like you really know Raphael. Enkiel looked at Nicola with a smile. Why do you say that? Nicola laughed. You just said that Raphael would definitely come. Intuition. Nicola's answer was very simple. Intuition? You really believe in this? Haha. Raphael, do you believe it or not? Nicola looked at Han Jin. Me? Sometimes I believe, sometimes I don't. The three powerhouses had overlooked a small episode. When Enkiel spoke to the other two, she always used honorifics, but when Nicola and Han Jin spoke to each other, they seemed to have forgotten etiquette. Perhaps this was an expression of hostility between them. They did not want to admit each other's existence, but they had to. At this moment, a roar came from afar. It turned out that there was a Hell's Gate in the center of the ancient castle. To the abyssal races, this was a very safe place, so the troops stationed there were far less than those on the surface. Nicola and Enkiel's sudden intrusion almost instantly destroyed all the defenses. This sudden attack was really unexpected, and the powerhouses left behind in the abyss world only reacted now. Han Jin looked back at the Hell's Gate that he had broken through. It was completely calm. It seemed like the flame tyrant, Lonker, and Donald did not dare to rashly chase after him. Who's on your side? Nicola noticed Han Jin's actions. The flame tyrant, Lonker, Han Jin replied. Sending such a person to deal with you was Donald's fatal mistake, Nicola said calmly. I heard that the fallen angel Catherine has already joined you? Although his tone was arrogant, he really had the right to judge the flame tyrant Lonker. Enkiel had the deep blue domain, Nicola had the starry sky domain, Donald had the death and decay domain, and Lonker had to rely on the lava barrier formed by countless evil fire spirits to protect himself. The difference between a domain and a barrier was the difference between their true power. On the long path of self-cultivation, these demigods seemed to be close to each other, but in reality, there was an insurmountable gap between them. Nicola, Donald, and Enkiel were undoubtedly in the first echelon, while the flame tyrant Lonker was in the second echelon, whether he admitted it or not. As for the fallen angel Catherine, the strength of an angel far exceeded that of a powerhouse in a broad sense. Even though she had lost the ability to release light magic, Catherine could still rely on her incomparably powerful strength and extreme speed to rank among the top echelons. You can't say that she's joined me. We're just friends, Han Jin said softly. I also want a friend like that. Nicola once again revealed a cynical smile. Aren't we friends? Enkiel smiled sweetly. Would you believe me if I said we are? Nicola shrugged. If you believed me, you wouldn't have to force Harriet to marry me. Speaking of which, I remember now. Enkiel's eyes shone brightly. If we can get out of here alive, Sir Nicola will hold a wedding with the guardian of the dragon domain, Harriet. Lord Raphael, will you come? You won't be stingy with giving the newlyweds your sincere blessings, right? Han Jin's gaze fell on Nicola. He caught a flash of helplessness. He didn't expect that someone as overbearing as Nicola would finally compromise with the dragons. It seems that a marriage with the dragons should be able to reap many benefits. Han Jin smiled. His words were somewhat sinister. Not only did he provoke the relationship between Nicola and the dragons, he also mocked Nicola, hinting that Nicola had compromised because of the temptation of those benefits. Nonsense. I'm starting to dislike you. Nicola's eyes were filled with displeasure and mischief. Are you moved? Want to learn from me? Don't worry, you'll have a chance. Han Jin was still thinking about what kind of price the dragons would have to pay. The negotiation had already failed, but Enkiel had still left the hammer of Thor and the bow of Howling behind, which showed how generous she was. Therefore, what Enkiel had paid Nicolai must be far more than the two holy weapons. Because Han Jin's mind was not here, he didn't realize Nicolai's hidden meaning for a moment. It was not until he noticed Nicolai's strange expression that he suddenly realized that there was a chance. What chance? Don't tell me you're talking about Enkiel. Enkiel's eyes turned cold. It was obvious that she didn't like this kind of joke. She glanced at Nicola, then turned her gaze to Han Jin. Lord Raphael? It seemed that she was looking forward to Han Jin's visit to the magnificent Light Empire's Iron Fist City. At this moment, a few tall figures appeared on top of the castle walls. They looked down and coldly sized up the people below. Abyssal great demons. However, Han Jin, Nicola, and Enkiel acted as if they didn't see anything. They appeared abnormally calm. Han Jin changed the topic. Nicola, have you ever thought about the situation the magnificent Light Empire will face without you? Will your people be able to block Donald's attack? I'm not used to thinking so much when doing things. Nicola couldn't help but laugh when he said this, as if he felt embarrassed because he had said a lame lie that even he didn't believe. The powerhouses of the Abyss world always want to run to our world to stir up trouble, but it's difficult for us to use the same method to repay them. This can't be, this absolutely can't be. I hate this kind of injustice. It's time for them to pay the price. What about your magnificent Light Empire? Han Jin stared at Nicola, trying to figure out Nicola's true intentions. That's not important. I used more than 10 years to create a magnificent Light Empire. Give me another 10 years, and I can still do it, and I can even do it better. Nicholas faintly said, I can risk everything to fight Donald, but does Donald dare to do it? How could he watch us destroy his demon palace and his demon pool without doing anything? I can guarantee that he'll come back. The roars grew louder and louder. They could already see countless long-horned demons and evil spirits rushing over the corpses of their companions. The abyssal great demons on the castle walls also slowly raised their size. Go back. Enkiel suddenly raised her voice. This is meaningless. Ha ha. Nicola laughed loudly. Enkiel, you're really an anomaly among the dragons. Your kindness makes others feel ashamed. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 549. The words Enkiel were like a bolt from the blue, causing the expressions of the abyssal great demons on the city wall to change. The great demons had the same feelings as the surface races when they saw Donald and Catherine. Han Jin and Nicholas were both rising stars. Before Donald decided to start a world war, the demigod powerhouse he was most wary of was Enkiel. Otherwise, he would not have transferred Prince Hani away from the battlefield. The church was destroyed by the infighting between the races on the ground. If Enkiel was killed as well, Donald believed that victory would definitely belong to the abyssal race. Unfortunately, Prince Hani appeared at the wrong time. The giant dragons of Dragon City and Dragon Realm had just found Enkiel and awakened her. Hani's fate was obvious when he faced the most powerful battle group of the Golden Dragon race. The great demons on the city wall were afraid. Although their mission was to ensure the stability of the Abyss world and they did not join the expedition, they more or less knew about the situation. Moreover, since Enkiel appeared here, the other two would definitely not be easy to deal with. At this moment, about hundreds of long-horned demons and evil spirits rushed out of the castle. They let out angry roars and charged straight at Han Jin and the other two. Nicholas looked at Han Jin, and Han Jin looked back at him. The former wanted to see the mysterious magic with his own eyes, while the latter wanted to understand the true power of the galaxy of stars. Neither wanted to make a move. Enkiel sighed softly. Her voice was filled with pity and helplessness. Then 2 ice rings appeared out of thin air, enveloping Han Jin and Nicholas respectively. Deep blue. With a soft shout, Enkiel pointed her right hand at the approaching longhorn demons. A startling azure light blossomed from Enkiel's fingertip, instantly turning into a canopy that covered an area of several hundred meters. Countless tiny icicles danced and spiraled in the air like a steaming mist. The bright red soil was suddenly covered in a layer of snow-white frost, and the thickness of the frost was still increasing. Frantically vibrating magic waves rolled in all directions like silent thunder. Even if they were more than 100 miles away from the castle, they could still clearly feel the changes in the element. It was as if the camera had suddenly stopped moving. All the abyssal warriors within a few hundred meters of Enkiel had turned into ice sculptures. However, they were not the ones who suffered the most, but the abyssal warriors outside the deep blue domain. The freezing air had already seeped out of the deep blue domain, causing the temperature in the air to drop far below freezing point. However, this temperature was not enough to turn the abyssal warriors into ice sculptures instantly. They still had the ability to move, but the muscles and blood vessels beneath their skin had already been frozen stiff. This was how the tragedy happened. While they were running at full speed, their legs and arms kept cracking open. However, their frozen nerves prevented them from feeling any pain. By the time they could no longer support themselves and fell to the ground, their bodies were already covered in dense cracks like a spider web. Some of the longhorn demons were half naked. Their chests were frozen stiff, and they could no longer breathe. They subconsciously opened their mouths, and the corners of their mouths cracked open without hesitation, even to the roots of their ears. Some felt their vision blur, and they could not see clearly. Of course, their frozen eyeballs could not maintain their vision. They tried to open their eyes wider, but the moment they exerted force, their fragile eyelids cracked open. Among the few abyssal great demons, one of them did not react at all, and was frozen on the castle wall. The other 3 had already disappeared. However, they could not teleport out of the deep blue domain. The next moment, an abyssal great demon appeared in the air. Like the long-horned demons and evil spirits, his body turned into an ice sculpture in an instant. He then fell straight from the sky and landed on the ground. With a bang, his body was smashed into pieces, and scattered all over the ground. However, there was a red glow in the shattered ice. It was the color of blood. The other 2 great demons appeared at the edge of the deep blue domain. Unfortunately, they could not teleport again. Their tall figures and eyes filled with unwillingness were covered in frost. Han Jin was shocked. The power of the deep blue domain was far beyond his expectations. No wonder Enkiel had used such a tone to talk about Prince Hani on the God of War. It was as if she did not put him in her eyes at all. So this was the reason. Once she opened her domain, no matter how many abyssal demons there were, they would not be able to get close to her, unless they also had a domain. After a few breaths of time, Enkiel had already retracted her domain. She said softly, "Let's go." Just like that? Nicholas stared at the hundreds of silent ice sculptures, and a playful smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "It's too easy on them," Han Jin said indifferently. As soon as his voice fell, his divine sense turned into a deafening roar and swept forward like a gust of wind. Boom! Boom boom boom! The hundreds of ice sculptures were shattered one after another by the divine sense, turning into a splattering of flowers. The remaining 3 great demons were also unable to escape this calamity. They turned into messy chunks of flesh and blood on the ground. They were snow-white and blood-red. It was a particularly shocking sight. Enkiel slowly lowered her eyes. It seemed that she could not bear it, but it did not seem like she was faking it. To put it bluntly, Acting in front of Nicholas and Han Jin was too difficult. There was no need for her to challenge it. Raphael, you are really a strange person, Nicholas said with a smile. Nicholas smiled and said, sometimes you are very annoying. Sometimes you are very likable. For example, right now. Next time, if there is such an opportunity, I will give it to you. Han Jin looked through the gate of the castle. Actually, you are also very strange. I heard others say that you are not an easy person to get along with. It turns out that what they said was not entirely correct. Who did you hear it from? Jeddis or Zhenglin? Nicholas's face became cold. They all said it. Is there a problem? Han Jin laughed. Why did you deliberately mention them? Nicholas's voice was very soft. You see, I am beginning to hate you again. You too, if there is anything, can you talk about it after we leave the abyss? Enkiel said coldly. In fact, she had been having a headache. This time, Nicholas was determined to attack the abyss. It would definitely become a variable in the entire war, and the situation of the war would become clear. This was the fundamental reason why she decided to join. Enkiel was worried that Han Jin and Nicholas, the two polar opposites of the world, would really fight each other in the Abyss world, just like the Black Dragon King Valentine and the Golden Dragon King Milu, who knew that they were wrong, but still chose to go all the way. In the end, it would lead to the tragedy of hurting oneself before hurting the enemy. With her help, at least they could find a balance and restraint. It has dragged on for too long. Nicholas's gaze moved away from Han Jin. The demon warriors should have made sufficient preparations on the other side of the gates of hell. Lord Raphael, please walk at the front. Is this revenge? Han Jin smiled. I am not that narrow-minded, Nicholas said. You have the life puppet, don't you? Besides, you are late. Otherwise, we might have already broken through the gates of hell. This is your plan? Han Jin smiled as usual. You should be grateful to me. I am the one who saved you. Lord Raphael, you mean? Enkiel was stunned. On the other side of the gates of hell is the cursed hill. There is still a magic formation set up by the death god of the era of the god. Han Jin said softly. If the two of you think you can fight against the death god, you can go ahead with your plan. However, I will not accompany you. How do you know? Nicholas's expression changed. He knew about the cursed hill, but he did not know that there was a death trap hidden in the cursed hill. According to common sense, this should be the core secret of the demon race. Not to mention Han Jin, even the fallen angel Catherine, who had joined Han Jin, would not know about this. Understand yourself and your enemies. Only then can you win every battle. Did you not think of anything before you entered the gates of hell? Nicholas fell silent. It was not that he did not want to understand, but that he had no way of understanding. Lord Raphael, what do you think we should do? Enkiel asked. Go that way. Han Jin pointed to the west. About 200 miles, there is a lava mountain that stretches for hundreds of miles. There are 3 paths there. One leads to the Sulphur Plains, which is the territory of the Black Dragons. Another path leads to the surface world, and another path leads down. After passing by a few cities, we can enter Grey Valley City. Grey Valley City? I have heard of it. It seems to be the largest city in the Abyss world. Enkiel paused. Lord Raphael, do you know about Grey Valley City? A little. Han Jin smiled. Although Grey Valley City is not the gathering place of the demon race, it is only 100 miles away from the Demon Mountain. It is precisely because of the protection of the demon race that Grey Valley City has evolved into the largest city in the Abyss world. If we can destroy it, it will cause devastating damage to the reputation of the demon race. If we can't even protect Grey Valley City, it is hard to imagine that the demons have the ability to protect other cities, and the abyssal races will lose confidence. How far is Grey Valley City from the lava mountain you mentioned? Enkiel asked seriously. It should be 700 or 800 miles away, and the path is rather complicated. There are too many forks in the abyss world, Han Jin said. But I know how to go. 700 or 800 miles. It is not too far. With our speed we can reach it in 2 days at most. Enkiel's gaze fell on Nicola. Lord Nicola, what do you think? This sentence had already proved Enkiel's attitude. She supported Han Jin's suggestion. Nicola remained silent. He suddenly realized that he was facing a different kind of battle. He, Frost Dragon Enkiel, and Raphael were already the 3 giants of the surface races. With the 3 of them together, it was impossible for them to act on their own. Even if it was a temporary mercenary team, they still needed a leader. Under the situation of equal strength and status, the one who knew the enemy better would be the leader. This was very natural. The problem was that he was unwilling to accept this. Everyone who saw Han Jin for the first time would more or less be deceived by his appearance. Han Jin was young, his eyes were clear, and his smile was full of sunshine. To put it simply, he was more like a carefree big boy than a powerhouse who was decisive in killing and whose hands were stained with blood. Although Nicola understood some things about Han Jin from various angles, he also made a mistake when he saw Han Jin for the first time. It had nothing to do with strength. He doubted that someone as young as Han Jin would have the shrewdness and scheming to match his strength. The information he had obtained also told him that Han Jin had done many wrong things. If it were him, he was confident that he would have done better. Therefore, Han Jin was definitely far inferior in these aspects. The facts immediately taught him a lesson. Han Jin kept saying that he had saved everyone. First, he pushed himself to the highest point of morality. Then, he showed that he knew the abyss world like the back of his hand. His intention was very obvious. He wanted the other 2 demigods to temporarily obey his arrangements and follow Han Jin. At this moment, Nicola even suspected that there was a magic array left by the death god Hamas on the cursed hill. Was all of this Han Jin's tricks? Perhaps in the eyes of others, there was nothing to consider. For the sake of the overall situation, whoever's suggestion was correct should be immediately executed. But to Nicola, it was not so simple. The king could not meet the king. This was not only the rule of the chessboard, but also the portrayal of reality. It contained unimaginable killing intent. Now, for the sake of the entire war, they were walking together and trying their best to maintain harmony. This was already the limit of Nicola's patience. Now, they still had to obey? Lord Nicola? Enkiel urged impatiently. You stupid dragon! A cynical smile appeared on Nicola's face again, but in his heart, he was mocking Enkiel. No wonder after the fall of the Golden Dragon King Milu, you were unable to stop the division of the Golden Dragon clan. In the end, you had to leave and live in seclusion. Haha! Now that the Golden Dragon clan is in trouble, I have to find you. Once the situation calms down, you will have to scram. It turned out that he, Nicola, had made 2 mistakes. He had underestimated Han Jin and overestimated Enkiel. Let's go, Nicola said softly. Nikolai said softly. Although he did not agree or disagree, he expressed his decision in a roundabout way. If he rejected Han Jin's suggestion, he would have to break through the last gate of hell. If what Han Jin said was true, then he would become a joke passed down through the ages. A negative example of someone who suffered misfortune because he did not trust his companions. Or, he could choose to hide in the abyss for a period of time and leave all the burdens to Han Jin and Enkiel. If he succeeded, he would reap the benefit. If he failed, he could return to the surface and be his final hero. But at Nicola's height, he would never choose a foolish shortcut. The reason he was able to come to this day and create brilliant achievements was because he had the courage to face everything head-on. Disappointment, pain, helplessness, loneliness, and separation of life and death. He had experienced them and faced them calmly. It was the same now. The so-called cultivation was ultimately the cultivation of one's heart and will. If he escaped, his footsteps would come to an abrupt halt. Okay. Enkiel turned around. Her eyes flickered, and a smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. Then, she regained her calmness and took the lead to shoot into the distance. Han Jin did not seem to expect Nicola to compromise without any fighting strength. He was stunned for a moment. Then, he unsheathed the long sword in his hand, stepped on the purple light, and chased after Enkiel. Nicola stared at Han Jin's back. His eyes were cold and calm. After a moment, he raised his foot and shot forward like a cannonball. The three of them headed west. They chose different methods. Enkiel used flight, but her speed was not as fast as the baby undying bird, nor was it as fast as Catherine. Of course, perhaps she did not use her full strength, just like when she activated the deep blue domain. They had no support here, and they might not be able to find a place to rest. Thus, they had to maintain their fighting strength as much as possible. Han Jin's figure was the most leisurely and carefree, which matched his handsome appearance perfectly. It was as if he was on a scenic tour. It was said that a sword saint who had his own domain could fly in the air, but Nicola relied entirely on his feet to travel. Every step he took left a deep footprint in the bright red soil. Around the footprint were irregular cracks that were thin, thick, long, and short. Then, his body pierced through the air like an arrow. He even made bursts of whistling sounds as he shot out 50 to 60 meters before slowing down. Then, he took another step. About half an hour after Han Jin and the others left the castle, the two Hell's Gates outside the castle and the Hell's Gate in the castle blossomed with light at the same time. Then, countless long-horned demons swarmed in, and the abyssal demons were hidden among the cannon fodder. There was no one outside the castle. There were only countless scattered blood-red ice cubes that were gradually melting into blood. Donald's tall figure appeared. With a flash, he appeared on the city wall and silently observed the messy scene. It had only been 10 days, but he seemed to have aged a lot. If it were someone else, they might have already collapsed or gone crazy from the successive blows. However, Donald's figure was still upright. The moment the death god's projection descended, he had already sensed it. He also knew that he had lost a brother forever. At that time, he hated Han Jin far more than he hated Nicola. However, he could not give up halfway. War was not a child's play. What made him feel even more helpless was that he could only keep the news of Prince Johnson's death a secret. Otherwise, the morale of the army would suffer another blow. Several abyssal demons flashed in the surroundings at the same time. They were searching for traces left by the enemy. Han Jin and Enkiel had left through the air, so naturally, they did not leave behind anything. However, Nicola's footprints were particularly conspicuous. There was one every 60 to 70 meters, extending into the distance. An abyssal great demon followed the footprints and looked to the west. Then, with a few flashes, he returned to Donald's side and whispered, "Your Majesty, they seem to be going to Lava Mountain." Lava Mountain? What are they going there for? Donald seemed to be asking the great demon, but also seemed to be asking himself. "Your Majesty, then, should we chase after them?" Donald narrowed his eyes. One Nicola was already a huge headache for him. With Han Jin and Enkiel, he had no chance of winning. Even if he did achieve victory, the demons would definitely pay a heavy price. Chapter 550. The Abyss world was not completely in darkness. Living beings needed the guidance of light, and light was not a problem in the vicinity of the lava mountain. The endless mountain range was hundreds of meters tall, and it illuminated the surrounding area for dozens of miles. Along with the continuous sound of gushing and rumbling, lava flowed down from the top of the mountain, forming a narrow lava lake. The so-called narrowness was relative. Looking down from above, the lava lake looked like a small willow leaf, but the narrowest part was still dozens of miles wide. There was no sign of living beings above or near the lava lake. The unbearable high temperature formed a natural boundary. Other than the evil fire spirit and the dark dragon clan, other living beings would find it difficult to endure such an environment. Han Jin, Nicholas, and Ankiel were more than 10 miles away from the lava lake, but they could still feel the burning smell in the air. After standing there for a moment, their lips were already dry. Nicholas grabbed a handful of soil and rubbed it in his palm. He slowly said, "There is no aura of life. I really can't imagine how the abyssal races survive." "It seems like you don't understand the abyssal races at all," Han Jin said. Although Nicholas had already vaguely warned him, he did not seem to take Nicholas' threat to heart. He always spoke without thinking. "I don't have the time to understand those reptiles," Nicholas said coldly. In fact, he was a very utilitarian person. He was only interested in things that could affect him or decide his future. If Nicholas had been like Solomon, in addition to managing his own country and completing his self-cultivation, he would have learned or tried his best to understand everything that could be summarized with knowledge. Perhaps, he would never have been as powerful as he was today. Even if he was a true god, his time and energy were limited. As the saying goes, if one specialized in algebra, it would be easier to become proficient in it. From another perspective, if Solomon were to focus on practicing magic, then his attainments in the field of magic would be far beyond what they were now. Unfortunately, Solomon was not someone who could be shaken, and his interest was not in magic. In order to ensure his own survival and to have more time to learn and understand, squeezing out some time and energy to practice magic was already a concession for Solomon. In addition to lava, there are countless underground rivers in the abyss. Where there is water, there will be all kinds of life. And Han Jin paused. "I don't know how to put it. They will form their own biological chain. Do you understand? Biological chain? I can roughly understand it." Enkiel smiled. "Like the relationship between a wolf and a rabbit?" "More or less," Han Jin said. "Near the underground river, there are a large number of mushroom-like creatures. Some can even grow to dozens of meters tall, like a forest. They are the most basic life forms. There are magical beasts in our forest, and in the forest of the abyss. Let's talk about which direction we should go." "What's the use of talking about this?" Nicola rudely interrupted Han Jin. "It's just idle chatter. Do you think everything you do has to be useful?" Han Jin glanced at Nicola. "You are too nervous." Nicola was speechless for a moment. He found that the more he interacted with Han Jin, the more difficult it was to deal with him. Every word he said could become a flaw. "Lord Raphael, are you not nervous at all?" Ankiel smiled. She knew how to balance things. Previously, Nicola was the one who had suffered, so now she had to speak up for him. "This is the abyss. To be honest, I am also nervous." "No." Han Jin smiled. His smile was more or less repulsive. Of course, this was from Nicola's perspective. "Are you really confident that you can escape the encirclement of the abyss demons?" Enkiel raised her eyebrows. This time, she had decided to enter the abyss. It was a huge risk. The power of the domain could not be used without limit. Moreover, she was not familiar with the terrain, and there was not enough space for her to soar. If she was targeted by a large group of abyss demons, she might be in trouble. "I have dealt with them many times," Han Jin said. "I know them." Han Jin avoided the question. He did not want to be too direct. The powerhouses of this world thought that his Earthmeld was the protection of Mother Earth, and they had underestimated its effectiveness. Han Jin was really relaxed. In his eyes, the entire abyss was like a shadow. If necessary, he could easily penetrate layer after layer of the earth and rise to the surface. On the other hand, if Nicola and Ankiel were trapped, they would really be done for. They would have no way out and could only fight to the last breath. Nicola and Ankiel looked at each other. They were judging the authenticity of Han Jin's confidence. Han Jin did not speak. He lowered his head and thought about something. The reason why he had targeted Nicola so many times was that Nicola was trying to occupy the dominant position. After responding, there was no need to continue creating discord. In his heart, he admired Nicola very much. If it were him, Han Jin, who would dare to enter the abyss without any guarantee of retreat. Han Jin guessed that the battle in the Kingdom of Magnificent Light should be very fierce. Nicola could not do anything to Donald, and Donald could not defeat Nicola. However, the Abyss demons had unparalleled mobility. Nicola could at most protect a certain area. He had no time to care about other places. Perhaps Nicholas could not bear to see the grand light empire he had created suffer in the war. Thus, like a red-eyed gambler, he threw caution to the wind and resolutely decided to barge into the Abyss world alone to restrain the high-end combat power of the Abyss demon race. No matter what, he had to admit Nicola's bravery. At least, Nicola had shown the responsibility of an emperor. A king should never die in the end. That would be a disgrace. Enmity was enmity, and evaluation was evaluation. There was no contradiction between the two. The clearer he saw, the fairer his evaluation. When facing Nicola in the future, he would make fewer or no mistakes. The three of them were silent for a moment. Ankiel was the first to break the silence. "Lord Raphael, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking, maybe Donald is already waiting for us in Grey Valley City," Han Jin said softly. "What?" Ankiel was stunned. "They are more familiar with the terrain than we are. They also know that our destination is Lava Mountain. There are only 3 main roads in the vicinity, and the rest of the forks lead to meaningless places." Han Jin said, "They can't possibly think that we are risking our lives to enter the abyss just to play hide and seek with them, right? Are you referring to the footprints I left behind?" Nicola could not stand Han Jin's repeated attacks, and his tone became even colder. But this time, he had really misunderstood Han Jin. "I also need them to make a wrong judgment." Han Jin lightly brushed over this question, and then said with a smile, "So, my 2 lords, we will have to part for a while." "Lord Raphael, what do you mean?" Ankiel was even more stunned. Han Jin did not answer. He took out a stack of maps from his spatial ring, flipped through them, and took out one of them. He handed it to Ankiel. "This is the map from Lava Mountain to Grey Valley City. The red line is the main road. Follow this main road, and you will reach Grey Valley City on time." Ankiel took the map, looked at it for a moment, and then asked again, "Lord Raphael, then, what are you going to do? Do you mean that we will meet in Grey Valley City?" "I have to interfere with Donald's arrangements. Otherwise, it will be too disadvantageous for us," Han Jin said slowly. "I will leave through that Hell's Gate. Don't worry, I won't delay the meeting time." "You are going to the Cursed Hill?" Ankiel was shocked. "Raphael, didn't you say that the Cursed Hill has a magic formation left behind by Death God Hamas in the Age of Gods? Are you lying to us?" Nicola said coldly. "They think that we will leave through Lava Mountain, so they will definitely let down their guard. They shouldn't be able to stop me." Han Jin smiled. He was too lazy to explain himself. "Even if there is danger, I still have Life Golem, don't I? We can go together. There is no need for you to take the risk alone," Ankiel said. "In fact, I learned about the demons from an abyssal demon called Leonardo. He was once the leader of the Purple Flower of Hell." Han Jin spoke a bit slowly. "So I know better than you that this is their territory. We can't let Donald set things up as he pleases. Someone has to restrain his energy." Ankiel quietly looked at Han Jin. It was Nicola who couldn't help but interject. "Raphael, why are you doing this?" He quickly understood Han Jin's intention. This was to cover for him and Ankiel. The more powerhouses Han Jin could restrain, the less pressure he and Ankiel would have. "Nicola, do you think that you are the only man in the world?" Han Jin's meaning was clear. "You can take risks for your empire, but I can also sacrifice myself for the victory of the entire race on the ground." Humans were able to overcome all kinds of difficulties and gradually prosper. It wasn't because they fought for power or how artistic their methods of killing each other were, but because they could always unite wisely in the face of threats. Humans knew that they were weak, so they also knew that when it was time to compromise, they had to compromise and then face the enemy together. It was a sharp contrast to the dark and golden dragons who fought to the death. The dragons were too powerful and too arrogant. They always thought that even if they paid a huge price to get rid of their mortal enemies, they still had the ability to face any challenge. Han Jin always remembered what Grand Duke Solomon had said. As early as when he entered the gates of hell, he had already decided that he would have to take more risk. It wasn't that his strength was far stronger than Nicola's, but it was because his Tao was more suitable. Nicola's eyes flickered. He wouldn't easily believe Han Jin's words, but he couldn't find a reason to doubt it. After pondering for a long time, Nicola's mouth slowly revealed a smile. "This is the Raphael I imagined." I'm starting again. You like me a little again? Han Jin smiled and interrupted Nicola's words. From the moment he and Nicola met, they were wary of each other, attacked each other, and fought to seize the initiative. From now on, all of this should come to an end. Han Jin didn't dare to say that they would definitely achieve great merits on this trip, but most of the miracles created in history required a prerequisite: the sincere cooperation of partners. Nicola laughed out loud, then quickly calmed down and asked in a low voice, "Is that abyss demon called Leonardo reliable?" Since Han Jin had already expressed his goodwill, Nicola wouldn't be stingy with showing his friendliness. He was reminding Han Jin that if the plan was built on an unreliable foundation, everything would become a mistake. The more he did, the more mistakes he would make. "I believe him." Han Jin smiled. Nicola frowned and was about to speak when Han Jin continued, "I know that if he had a choice, Leonardo would never rely on me. But, because of some conflicts, he sent Donald's sons to me. How could Donald forgive him? There's no turning back for him. If this is really Donald's trap, the price is too high." "You killed Donald's sons." Nicola was shocked, then suddenly had a look of realization. "I was wondering, why Donald?" Ha 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 ha. At the end of his words, Nicola thought of something and laughed out loud again. And it wasn't because he was gloating, but because he thought of something very, very interesting. He laughed so happily that tears almost came out of his eyes. Enkiel's perfect red lips opened slightly as she stared blankly at Nicola. It was obvious that she had never seen Nicola lose his composure like this. "What are you laughing at?" Han Jin also felt that it was very strange. What he said wasn't that funny. Nicola finally stopped laughing and walked a dozen steps toward the lava lake. He then waved at Enkiel, indicating for her to come over. Enkiel glanced at Han Jin. If she wanted to maintain her neutral position, she shouldn't appear too close to anyone. But she was really curious about what could make Nicola lose his composure. After hesitating for a moment, she slowly walked toward Nicola. In the beginning, Han Jin and Enkiel chatted for a while, and Nicola seemed very dissatisfied. But now, he didn't have any awareness. He whispered to Enkiel for more than 10 minutes, and Enkiel's expression became more and more strange. After a while, Nicola and Enkiel came back. Enkiel could see that Han Jin was unhappy. Anyone who had been left alone for more than 10 minutes would be unhappy. Enkiel thought for a moment, then turned to Nicola and whispered, "Can I say it?" "No way, right? You're betraying me?" Nicola sighed. Enkiel ignored Nicola and smiled. "We didn't talk about anything else. We just talked about your past. I heard, you have a very interesting nickname." "Nickname?" Han Jin was stunned. "You killed Dismark's illegitimate son, and after some time you killed Dismark. You killed Zagund's son, and then you killed Zagund. It seems, when fate decides who will fall in your hands, it always arranges for you to kill their children first." Enkiel was obviously trying to hold back her laughter. So, Lord Nicola thinks that he has enough reason to predict that Donald will die in your hands, and he doesn't want to compete with you for this honor. And Lord Nicola has even more reason to predict that you won't be able to defeat him, because you didn't kill his heir, Prince Tinos. He said that this is probably the only time in your life that you've failed. Han Jin was speechless, and there was a helpless smile on his face. It was a coincidence, and he also hated that nickname. Nicola in front of him was really annoying. However, the fact that Nicola could joke about Tinos was a signal that they could let go of the past disputes, and at least for now, they would work together. What I said is the truth, right? Nicola shrugged as if nothing had happened. Lord Enkiel, this is for you. Han Jin wisely avoided the topic, and then took out a ring from his space ring and threw it to Enkiel. This is... Enkiel caught the ring and asked suspiciously. That's too disrespectful. Nicola shook his head. In the Grand Light Empire, the ceremony of giving rings to each other is very solemn. Lord Nicola, we are talking about business, Enkiel said angrily. Han Jin pretended that he didn't hear anything. Put it on, and I can find your position at any time. Oh! Angiel put the ring on her finger and found that it was loose and large. The width of the ring was even wider than her thumb. It was clearly not prepared for her. This. Ankiel looked up at Han Jin. As long as you don't put it in the space ring. Han Jin said. Ankiel was right. The ring was originally prepared for Nicola, but Han Jin changed his mind at the last minute. Understood. Enkiel nodded. That's all for now. See you in Grey Valley City. Han Jin waved his hand casually, turned around, and floated in the direction of the castle like a wisp of smoke. Enkiel stared at Han Jin's back and said softly, "This should be his plan." "Yes," Nicola replied. "What do you think of him?" "He is a rare opponent and also a rare partner," Nicola said calmly. "That's it. Not enough?" Nicola asked, showing a cynical smile again. He was qualified to ask, and there were not many people in the world who could make him say so. Just as Han Jin had expected, the castle's defenses became lax, and only a few long-horned demons were cleaning up the battlefield. The corpses of their companions weren't important, but the great demons of the abyss were. The long-horned demons knelt on the ground, respectfully holding the messy piles of flesh and carefully placing them in the crystal coffins beside them. There was also the only intact relic left behind by the great demons of the abyss, the space magic crystal. In the abyss, no one dared to use a space magic crystal. It was an unforgivable blasphemy, and it would provoke the demons to come out in full force. And the space magic crystal left behind by the demons of the abyss could only go to one place, the morning hall of the demon palace. Soon, the long-horned demons carried the crystal coffins and walked towards the Hell's Gate. But when they were a few dozen meters away from the Hell's Gate, a figure suddenly rose from the ground. Chapter 551. Han Jin's appearance had long been known to the Abyss warriors. The long-horned demons immediately felt a chill down their spines and were at a loss of what to do. Facing Han Jin, there was no point in fighting or running away. They could only stare blankly at Han Jin. Han Jin gently flicked the long sword in his hand, and the crystal coffin lid suddenly flew up into the air, revealing the bloody flesh inside. Han Jin raised his palm and pressed it down. Boom! Under the impact of his powerful divine mind, the pile of flesh flew up like fireworks, and countless small cracks appeared on the coffin walls. The long-horned demons could no longer lift the coffin, and the crystal coffin fell heavily to the ground. Han Jin's fingertips probed into the fireworks, and a bright and full magical crystal appeared in his palm. He looked at it carefully and kept it in his spatial ring. Of course, he would not forget the legacy of the Abyss Demon. The problem was that Enkiel's existence made him a little apprehensive. Enkiel was a member of the Dragon Clan, so she definitely had a magical crystal in her body. If he were to search for the magical crystal in front of Ankiel, wouldn't Ankiel feel sorry for him? As an intelligent life, most of them had their own pride and dignity. Would Ankiel tolerate such a thing happening in front of her? In order to defeat Donald, the three of them maintained a delicate balance, and Han Jin did not want to destroy it. Moreover, according to his plan, it would not be too late to retrieve the magical crystal later. There was no need to risk angering Ankiel. Under certain circumstances, a curve was often easier to achieve than a straight line. The Longhorn demons finally understood the purpose of Han Jin's visit, but no one dared to stand out and stop him. They continued to stare blankly at Han Jin. The 4 crystal coffins were opened by Han Jin, and the 4 space top-grade magic crystals fell into Han Jin's hands one after another. A satisfied smile appeared on Han Jin's face as he turned around and strode toward the gates of hell. Seeing that Han Jin did not care about them at all, the Longhorn demons did not know whether to laugh or cry. The danger was leaving little by little, and they appeared to be more careful, afraid that they would make any noise and attract Han Jin's attention. They even held their breaths involuntarily. The next moment, Han Jin disappeared into the gates of hell again. The Longhorn demons took a deep breath in unison, and a few of them could not stand still and fell to the ground. As the saying went, the wicked would always be met with the wicked. From their names, one could tell how vicious and cruel they would be when facing weak life. But in front of Han Jin, they were as obedient as lambs. On the other side of the gates of hell, Han Jin was in a daze for a short while, and his eyes took in everything around him. Just 4 to 5 meters in front of Han Jin, there were 2 abyssal demons who were also in a daze. They were in charge of guarding the cursed hill, and they did not expect a human to suddenly appear. Generally speaking, the job of guarding the cursed hill was very tedious and dull. There had never been a desperado among the abyssal races that dared to act wildly in the cursed hill. And the cursed hill was located in the Demon Mountain, and several thousand meters behind it was the abyssal world's holy land, the Demon Palace. Rather than saying that they were guarding this place, it would be better to say that they were keeping up appearances. To put it more bluntly, those 2 abyssal demons were the doormen outside the hotel. Just a moment ago, it was said that powerhouses from the surface had already broken into the gates of hell. In just a dozen breaths of time, the Demon Palace's abyssal demons swarmed out and surrounded the cursed hill, waiting for the powerhouses from the surface to appear. But after waiting for a long time, there was no movement at all. Then Donald appeared. It turned out that the powerhouses from the surface did not dare to break into the final checkpoint and turned to escape towards the lava mountain. Donald returned to the Demon Palace and gathered the abyssal demons to discuss countermeasures, and the cursed hill became peaceful once more. Nicholas had gambled correctly this time. Donald did not dare to perish together with him. Without Nicholas, the Grand Light Empire would definitely not be able to resist Donald's attack. And without Donald, the Demon Palace would also be reduced to ruins by the sudden attack of the 3 heads of the surface. And Han Jin's timing was just right. He couldn't be too early, as the abyssal demons had yet to leave the cursed hill. But he couldn't be too late either. After Donald finished his arrangements, every region near the Demon Mountain would be on high alert. While Donald was deploying his troops, the Demon Mountain's defenses would be at their most lax. Of course, Han Jin was unable to guess Donald's thoughts. He dared to come in completely relying on the false Earth Corpse technique. At worst, he would just have to destroy one of his talismans and immediately flee. He would hide in a safe place and once again use the false Earth Corpse technique before coming out to cause trouble. The 2 abyssal demons reacted at the same time. Their sickles emitting cold light, one on the left and one on the right, slashed towards Han Jin's shoulders. Then, a mournful howl tore through the black fog lingering in the sky and spread into the distance. Han Jin's figure moved to the side, and saber light blossomed with a loud bang. Because of his position and angle, the abyssal demon on the right side of Han Jin was the first to be attacked. He made the first move, and when his sickle was still a few feet away from Han Jin's shoulder, Han Jin's saber light had already arrived first, sweeping across his sickle. The seemingly incomparably tough sickle was quietly cut in half like a piece of paper. Han Jin's long saber continued to roll forward, cutting into the abyssal demon's ear and slashing through his eyebrows. The abyssal demon's head had already been split open, and the upper half of his head was sent flying into the sky like a pot lid. Blood splattered everywhere, and the abyssal demon's eyes instantly became misty, and his body softly fell to the ground. The remaining abyssal demon experienced the speed of Han Jin's attack. He didn't even wait for his sickle to fall and had already used instant transmission, appearing in the distance. However, he didn't run away, and only stared at Han Jin with frightened and uneasy eyes. Han Jin gently raised his long saber, and with a puff, the tip of the saber pierced through the tumbling pot lid. Then, Han Jin's arm shook, and the pot lid suddenly exploded. Han Jin reached out and grabbed the magic crystal that was still dripping with blood. He didn't have time to wipe it off, and directly put it into his spatial ring. Then, he looked around. The so-called Demon Mountain was not a mountain in the traditional sense. Instead, it was a giant stone pillar that was hundreds of meters in diameter and even more than 1,000 meters in diameter. It connected the high dome above and the soil below. The entire world was like a giant stalactite cave. In the deepest place where the giant stone pillars were densest, there was a palace-shaped building that was flickering with red light. Han Jin had seen many landforms of the abyss, but he had never seen such a tall dome of heaven. He roughly estimated that it was several thousand meters tall. The vast world should have given him a sense of relaxation, but those countless stone pillars made him feel particularly oppressed. Although that palace-shaped building was lofty and majestic, it seemed insignificant compared to the surrounding world. But for some reason, Han Jin knew that the abyssal palace was the center of this world. The soil under his feet was wriggling slightly. If Han Jin flew into the sky at this moment, he would find that the wriggling soil was actually composed of thousands of vivid faces. These faces seemed to be alive, and were aging at a speed visible to the naked eye, and then completely disappearing. However, as soon as one face disappeared, another completely different face would appear. They kept disappearing and reappearing, and were constantly twisting. Some of the faces were even desperately opening their mouths as if they were howling silently. Han Jin seemed to be attracted by the different scenery around him, and completely forgot about himself. He simply didn't notice that the earth below his feet had already turned black and was slowly wrapping around his boots. The abyssal demon revealed a hideous smile. He held the scythe tightly with both hands and walked toward Han Jin step by step. The elite demon warriors who accompanied Donald on the expedition certainly knew how powerful Han Jin was, but for a doorman, his knowledge was too limited. Compared to the other companions, he was too young. He even forgot the fear just now and wanted to take the credit alone before his companions arrived. The black earth had already wrapped around Han Jin's knees, and his calves and feet had become thick and thick. In fact, the magic array left by the death god Hamas hadn't been activated yet. Absorbing the aura of life was just an instinct of the cursed hill. Han Jin sighed softly, took out a magic scroll from the space ring, and threw it out. The magic scroll floated more than 10 meters away and suddenly lit up. It instantly turned into a golden ball of light that was about 7 or 8 meters in radius. It was as if a sun had suddenly appeared in this world. Thousands of rays of light shot out in all directions like sharp arrows. Those were not ordinary rays of light, but a torrent of light that was much thinner than a cow's hair. They mercilessly lashed the ground, the giant stone pillars, and the abyssal demon. It was a forbidden light spell, God's revelation. The abyssal demon howled and threw away the scythe. He covered his eyes with both hands. Streams of blood had already seeped through the gaps between his fingers and flowed down the back of his hands. The thousands upon thousands of lifelike faces on the cursed hill were also attacked. The shattering of each face caused the soil to writhe furiously. With thousands upon thousands of faces shattering at the same time, the entire ground started to tremble crazily, as if there was a super-powerful earthquake. Countless silhouettes shot out from the demon palace, constantly flickering as they rapidly approached the cursed hill. The abyssal demons had extremely strong mobility. They only needed a few breaths of time to arrive and surround the cursed hill. At this time, Han Jin had already put the 6th top-quality spatial magic crystal he had obtained today into his space ring. He then formed a hand seal, and a shrinking spell appeared in the distance. The abyssal demons moved quickly, but Han Jin wasn't slow either. The two sides quickly rushed out of the range of the demon mountain. Han Jin glanced behind him, and his figure suddenly shrank, soon disappearing without a trace. In just 2 or 3 breaths of time, several hundred abyssal demons had already surrounded the place Han Jin had disappeared. Donald slowly walked to the front and stared at the earth under his feet. After a long time, he softly sighed. If Zagund was still alive and Donald asked him about his feelings towards Han Jin, he would have definitely bluntly told Donald that it was a nightmare. Han Jin could not only teleport, but he could also use Mother Earth's protection to disappear without a trace. In other words, if he wanted to kill Han Jin, he would have to kill him in an instant. But killing a demigod was easier said than done. Moreover, killing him once wasn't enough, he had to kill him twice. At this time, it was Donald's turn to experience the taste of a nightmare. While Donald was sighing, Han Jin had already walked out of a mountain wall, holding his long blade and sizing up the scenery in front of him with interest. What kind of consequences would a traitor cause? A disaster. This would definitely be a disastrous disaster. What if it was a traitor on the level of Leonardo? At best, it could cause the collapse of an organization or a group of forces. At worst, it could decide the direction of a battle, or even the fate of a country or several countries. In order to win Han Jin's trust, Leonardo had racked his brains. Ever since Han Jin gave him the task, he had spent all the time and energy he could squeeze out to recall. 2/3 of the things he gave Han Jin were the information he brought with him when he decided to escape, and the other 1/3 were what he wrote and recalled in those days. Moreover, as the highest leader of the Purple Flower of Hell, he had a wealth of professional knowledge and accomplishment. In order to prevent himself from missing anything, he even began to recall everything step by step from the moment he gained Donald's trust, and no matter how big or small, he memorized everything. Leonardo knew that things that he didn't think were necessary could be of great help to Han Jin. Leonardo also made comments on the things he made. If he thought they were very important, he would write 3 stars in front. If it was important, he would write 2 stars in front. If it wasn't important, he would write 1 star in front. Leonardo's goal was to make it easier for Han Jin to browse through the information according to the time he had. The Demon Mountain and the Demon Palace were mysterious existences to all the powerful beings on the surface. Even if they entered the Demon Mountain, they might not know where they were. But to Han Jin, he knew everything like the back of his hand. If the heavens want to destroy, they must first make them crazy. With Donald's experience and knowledge, what could make him go crazy? The answer was in Han Jin's eyes. In front of him was a neat training ground. There were about 40 little demons holding metal scythes, charging and slashing at the targets in front of them. Abyssal demons at this age didn't have magic crystals in their bodies yet. If they recklessly used teleportation, it would be very detrimental to their development. Therefore, their training method was similar to that of the swordsmen on the surface. Although the demons were young, they had a certain amount of strength and momentum, especially when they charged forward with large strides. Their thick and hard tails drew deep grooves on the ground. Occasionally, they would hit a rock, and sparks would fly from the impact. On the other side of the training ground, there were a dozen little demons laughing and watching the fun. Compared to their companions who were training, they lacked a thick tail. When demons reached adulthood, their tails would fall off. Then, they would go to the demon pond to listen to the teachings of the god of death, Hamas. After being tempered in the demon pond, and being polished day after day and year after year, they worked hard to make scythes with their tailbones. The scythes in the hands of every abyssal demon were made by themselves, and they were connected to their minds. When they had a satisfactory scythe, they would leave the demon pond. At that time, they would become true abyssal demons. Among them, demons who could communicate with the god of death, Hamas, would be specially trained by their clansmen. Unlike the Titans, the female abyssal demons were much more fragile. Their tailbones stopped growing when they were young, and the horns on their foreheads were very short. However, they were much more beautiful than the male demons. Although they were not very beautiful, at least they were not ugly. The little demons sitting on the other side of the training ground were the first to see Han Jin. They began to chatter noisily. The female demon who was in charge of looking after the children noticed that something was wrong and immediately turned around. When she saw Han Jin, she could not help but be stunned. The little demons who were training also immediately changed their target and stood beside and behind their teacher with their scythes. It was said that newborn calves were not afraid of tigers. This saying was very true. Not only were there no signs of fear in their eyes, but on the contrary, they gave people a feeling that they were up to no good. "Your Excellency is..." The female demon stepped forward and blocked the little demons behind her. She kept waving her hands behind her back, as if telling the little demons to leave immediately. Unfortunately, the little demons who thought that they were about to enter a real battle disobeyed her orders and continued to stare at Han Jin. "Honorable lady, my name is Raphael." Han Jin slightly bowed. He had learned this from Hollister. He noticed that the female demon was wearing an extremely luxurious headband that covered her short legs. The headband was inlaid with colorful treasures. It seemed that the female demon's status was not low. The female demon was stunned again. In just a few seconds, bean-sized beads of sweat appeared on her forehead. Obviously, she knew about Han Jin's background. Han Jin raised his head and looked around. This training ground was on the east side of the demon palace, and was covered by a layer of darkness. He had already been here for a while, but the demon palace did not react at all. The long period of peace had greatly reduced the alertness of the demons. In fact, everyone had a hidden laziness in their hearts. After Jedis entered the Holy Crown City, he did not rush to set up a magic array in the Holy Church. It was not until the dragons attacked the Holy Church that he made setting up a magic array his top priority. Perhaps only by suffering losses could one learn a lesson. In other words, humans were slowly improving while suffering losses. They are still a group of children," the female demon said bitterly. Han Jin had already appeared here. Did they still need to think about what was going to happen? "I know." Han Jin smiled and turned his gaze back to the female demon. If this place was the surface world, and a woman stood in front of Donald and told him that she only wanted to protect a group of children, what would Donald do? "Haha, I come from the Freedom Federation. There are many cities there, and everyone was killed. However, not a single corpse could be found. That's because the hellhounds won't even spare the bones. I admit that these children look very cute, but if I don't do anything, how can I face the victims?" Before the female demon could speak, a little demon who seemed to be the leader let out a sharp roar. "You dare to call His Majesty by his name? Bastard! I will cut off your leg and stuff it in your mouth. Let's see if you still dare to be presumptuous." Han Jin lowered his head and looked at his leg seriously. Then he shook his head. "I was wrong, you are not cute at all. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 552. Hughes, you take them and leave. Quickly. The female abyssal cried out anxiously, her face twisting and twitching. At the same time, she reached out to grab the eager little abyssal and pushed him to the back with all her might. Perhaps because they had never seen their teacher reveal such a sinister expression, the little demons were all stunned and didn't know what to do for a moment. You can shout louder, Han Jin said with a smile. He was hinting at her to call for reinforcements. The female demon suddenly roared. Her voice was abnormally sharp, giving people the feeling that it could pierce through clouds and split rocks. Even if she knew that her opponent had deliberately set a trap for her, she couldn't care less. Her shout hadn't even stopped when the little demon in the lead brandished his scythe and rushed forward. Clearly, he had misunderstood his teacher and thought that it was a signal for battle. With someone taking the lead, the other little demons naturally weren't to be outdone. They all roared and rushed towards Han Jin. It had to be said that these little demons moved very quickly. Even if the female demon wanted to stop them, it was already too late. Her face suddenly became deathly pale. Her figure moved, and with an even faster speed, she decisively passed by the little demons. She reached out and snatched a metal scythe from one of the little demons. Her figure then disappeared from where she stood, and in the next moment, she appeared in front of Han Jin. The metal scythe whistled as it chopped down on Han Jin's head. There was no anger or fear in the female demon's eyes, only deep grief. The outcome had already been foreseen. Han Jin's name was synonymous with nightmares among the abyssal demons. He was able to kill Donald's sons and even Prince Johnson. This kind of existence shouldn't be someone she could resist. However, she still rushed forward without hesitation. The pride of an abyssal demon wouldn't allow her to abandon the children behind her. At this moment, she wasn't afraid of death. The reason she was grieving was because she knew that Han Jin wouldn't let any of the children go. From the perspective of an abyssal demon, this female demon's actions were worthy of admiration. She knew that she would die, but she still pressed forward. This kind of bravery was rare even in the human world. However, this wasn't a battle in the ordinary sense. It was a life-and-death struggle between different races. What he had seen and heard in the Freedom Federation made Han Jin unable to feel the slightest bit of pity for her suicidal actions. Han Jin's figure flashed to the left, and at the same time, the heavenly Tao in his hand surged. A purple light blade more than 10 meters long swept out, and the female devil was the first to bear the brunt of the attack. She screamed as she was cut into two halves. Her upper body shot into the sky like a firework, while her lower body flew for 5 or 6 meters before finally falling to the ground. Blood gushed out of her body, leaving 2 red trails in the air. Following that, flowers of blood bloomed one after another, and the blood mist almost covered the entire field. The little demons that rushed over were cut down like straws before they could catch Han Jin's fast-moving figure. Everything happened too fast, so fast that they didn't even have the chance to regret. The remaining few little demons stared blankly for a moment before frantically screaming. They threw away the metal scythes in their hands, turned around, and fled. The little demons on the other side of the field were also scared into rolling and crawling as they fled. Han Jin's figure flew like a wisp of smoke. The blood that was falling from the sky was shaken off and scattered as if it had hit an invisible barrier a few meters away from him. He didn't chase after the escaping little devils. Instead, he stopped and quietly glanced at the playground. To Han Jin's surprise, there was still an imp alive at the scene. There was no longer any trace of arrogance on the imp's face, only extreme fear. The splashing blood was obviously beyond his ability to bear. He sat on the ground, motionless, as if he was scared out of his wits. Han Jin walked in front of that little demon and bent down to size him up for a moment. Then with a flick of his wrist, a warm and rosy lotus appeared in his hand. Han Jin gently blew, and that red lotus slowly floated up and approached that little demon. Then with a flash of red light, the red lotus miraculously penetrated into that little demon's chest. "Little guy, don't be afraid. It will be over soon." Han Jin smiled, then straightened up and swept his gaze over half a circle. The field was already covered in blood, and not a single demon could be seen standing. Han Jin walked in front of the female demon's corpse and bent down. When he stood up, a bright magic crystal appeared in his hand. Satisfied, he put the magic crystal into his space ring. Han Jin glanced at the demon palace towering under the black curtain, then turned around and disappeared into the mountain wall. At the same time as Han Jin disappeared, the figure of an abyssal great demon appeared in the middle of the field. The roar of that female demon was sharp enough that it was impossible for no one to hear it. Bright red blood wantonly flowed on the dark ground, and that abyssal great demon's feet were soaked in blood. The great demon that was famous for his ruthlessness and bloodthirstiness had suddenly turned into a statue that had lost its ability to move. Ironically, the reason for this change was precisely the bloody scene that the demon race liked to enjoy. After a long time, the great demon's head began to slowly turn, but its movements were still incomparably stiff. It seemed that just making such a simple movement had already exhausted all its strength. Finally, the great demon found that little figure in the pool of blood. It was that little demon that had once enjoyed a short period of luck. A trace of vitality suddenly appeared in the great demon's eyes, because it suddenly discovered that the little demon's body was in perfect condition. Could it be that he was still alive? The great demon forcibly suppressed the great happiness that came from escaping from death's door. It cautiously walked to the little demon's side, squatted down, and extended its trembling finger little by little towards the little demon. The great demon took more than a minute to complete an action that would normally take less than a second. When it finally touched the little demon's neck, the feeling transmitted from its fingertips clearly told it a fact. The little demon's heart was still beating, but the temperature of its skin was somewhat high. It let out a long sigh of relief, but when its line of sight shifted to other places, its heart instantly fell to the bottom. There was only one survivor, all the other children were dead. The great demon's lips trembled violently, and it suddenly raised its head. Extreme anger caused the corners of its eyes to burst open, and traces of blood flowed down. It issued an extremely mournful roar, and the extremely penetrating sound was like a muffled thunder, rolling along the dark sky into the distance. The rapidly flashing demons involuntarily stopped moving. Donald raised his head and looked in the direction of the sound. The heart-wrenching pain contained in the sound made Donald's heart sink. After a few breaths, the sky above the field thundered with a deafening roar. The deathly black curtain that had always been shrouded above the demon palace was also stirred up by the powerful sound waves, just like the surging anger in the hearts of the demons. However, even the surging anger could not change the fact in front of their eyes. Every demon, including Donald, was covered with a layer of gray color. Almost all the superior races were facing the same predicament, and so were the abyssal demons. They had always had difficulty reproducing, and there were only a few dozen little demons that could undergo preliminary combat training. At this moment, all of them had turned into messy flesh and blood. After thousands of years of recuperation, the demons had developed to an unprecedented level under Donald's leadership. The reason why Donald dared to set foot on the surface was that, on one hand, the church had been destroyed, and on the other hand, the demons had enough new generation strength. It had to be known that before this, the number of imps that the demon clan had at most at one time was no more than 30. Therefore, Donald had every reason to think that the demons were at their peak. However, everything was destroyed now, and God knew how long it would take for them to regain their former glory. The abyssal demons roared and growled, and their bloodshot eyes wanted to do something to vent the grief and anger in their hearts that they could not suppress. However, they helplessly realized that they could not even see the shadow of the enemy. Hence, the redness in their eyes was gradually replaced by madness. There was even a demon who smashed half of the wall with a punch in a rage. Donald stood there motionlessly. To be precise, he had not moved since he appeared here. The tragic deaths of his sons, the fall of his biological brother, and the tragic scene in front of him had turned into thousands of poisonous snakes that kept gnawing at Donald's bleeding heart. Surprisingly, there was no grief on Donald's face. There was only exhaustion that seeped into his bones and numbness that was extremely mournful. The betrayal of the fallen angel Catherine had once made Donald fly into a rage. However, compared to the bloody scene in front of him, it seemed insignificant. What was going on? Donald's eyes were somewhat blank. He could not understand why things had turned out like this. Even now, he did not realize what the decision to set foot on the surface had brought to the demons. If Donald could calm down, if he could carefully analyze the current situation, if he could admit defeat, if he could be more decisive, then perhaps the best decision he could make at this moment would be to evacuate the demons from this place. The current demon palace was no longer a symbol of the demons' dominance in the abyss. It was more like a ferocious beast that had immense strength but could not move freely. It attracted hunters like Han Jin, who were everywhere, to wander around it, ready to add a bloody wound to it at any time. However, there were not so many ifs in the real world. Perhaps the deaths of his sons could not make Donald completely lose his mind. However, at this moment, something seemed to be quietly surging and growing in the depths of Donald's heart. This battle would not end until one of them died. Donald looked at the boundless darkness outside the demon palace and let out a soundless roar in his heart. Suddenly, an incomparably magnificent red light flew out from the chest of the surviving imp and condensed into a red lotus. The light soared into the horizon and even dyed the black sky red. Countless beautiful and dangerous petals fell from the red lotus and flew in all directions. The first great demon to arrive at the field was the first to bear the brunt of the attack. He was so close that he didn't even have time to teleport before his body was burned full of holes by the petals. The magic released by Han Jin was not a secret to the demons of the abyss. However, the problem was that this terrifying magic had appeared at the most unexpected moment and in the most unexpected place without any warning. Moreover, all the demons of the abyss had entered a berserk state and did not have time to react. "Be careful!" A lame great demon beside Donald roared and released instant transmission at the same time. Unfortunately, it was already too late. Han Jin's red lotus hellfire could spread to a radius of 1,000 meters in a few seconds. Even if the demons of the abyss desperately released instant transmission, they would not be able to escape the range of the red lotus hellfire in a few seconds. It could be said that all the demons of the abyss were doomed. The surviving imps turned into ashes, and the dozens of demons of the abyss nearby were also pierced by countless petals. Moreover, the sea of petals was rapidly spreading in all directions. Once the power of the red lotus hellfire was fully released, the outcome was inevitable. At this moment, the rolling sea of petals suddenly stopped as if time had suddenly stopped. The warm and gentle petals quietly hovered in the air like an extremely beautiful picture. However, the demons of the abyss were not in the mood to enjoy the scenery. They immediately released instant transmission and escaped into the distance. Not to mention that the red lotus hellfire could cause fatal damage to them. Staying in Donald's domain of death and decay would not be any better. Flames of madness surged in Donald's eyes. The space within 100 meters around him gradually dimmed, and even his figure was gradually swallowed by the darkness. In just a dozen breaths of time, Donald could no longer be seen from the outside. Only streaks of twisted purple lightning could be seen, as well as countless petals quietly hovering in the air. Compared to the color of Han Jin's heavenly way, the lightning of Donald's domain of death and decay was very deep and profound. Although their bodies were twisted in all kinds of strange ways, they gave off an extremely peaceful feeling. In other words, it was a kind of deathly stillness. On the other hand, Han Jin's heavenly way shone brightly and was full of vitality. Hundreds of demons of the abyss stood outside the domain of death and decay. They all had different expressions. Some were still in shock, some were angry, and some were trembling. They were still grieving over the tragic deaths of their children, but who knew that in the blink of an eye, they would lose at least 7 or 8 of their companions. This could not be blamed on Donald. In fact, Donald's speed was already very fast. When the sea of petals had just spread out, he had released his domain and imprisoned the red lotus hellfire. If there was anyone to blame, it could only be that Raphael for being too sinister. After an unknown period of time, Donald suddenly let out an angry roar. His voice seemed to contain an incomparably powerful force. The hovering petals were shattered one by one, turning into scattered specks of light. Donald did not need to do this. The red lotus hellfire's effect was nearing its end. As long as Donald continued to maintain his domain, the red lotus petals would soon be extinguished. However, Donald could not control his emotions. He had to do something to vent his anger. At the same time, Han Jin jumped out of the ground outside the Demon Mountain. His body staggered, and a trace of blood slowly seeped out from the corner of his mouth. The imprisonment and destruction of the red lotus hellfire had caused a huge shock to his divine sense. Not only could magic produce a backlash, but so could Tao arts. Donald's strength caused his expression to become serious. Of course, this injury was nothing. He just needed to find a place to rest for a while. Han Jin let out a long breath and sank into the ground again. On the field at the side of the demon palace, the atmosphere was gloomy. Hundreds of abyssal demons were staring at Donald. Although Donald could still maintain a calm expression, his heart had already turned cold. Han Jin suddenly broke into the gates of hell and attacked the cursed hill. That was nothing. Donald had seen through Han Jin's intention at the first moment. It was just to disrupt the demon's attention, create a threat, and try his best to restrain the demons to provide cover for Nicholas and Ankiel. Donald had already made his decision. He was prepared to leave his younger brother, Prince Han Jin, and a small number of demon warriors behind to deal with Han Jin's attack. He himself would lead the elites of his clan to Grey Valley City to surround Nicholas and Ankiel. Among the 3 powerhouses on the ground, Han Jin was undoubtedly the most difficult to kill, followed by Ankiel, and Nicholas was the target that he had to capture. As long as he could find Nicholas and think of a way to disrupt the spatial elements and make all the spatial scrolls lose their effectiveness, Nicholas would be in the bag. With the speed of the abyssal demons, they would not let Nicholas go until Nicholas was exhausted. But at this moment, Donald finally understood who was the most terrifying, the most difficult, and the one with the biggest appetite. Han Jin was not a wolf in charge of harassing its prey, but a lion hiding in the grass. As long as he found a flaw, he would immediately jump out and deliver a fatal blow. Donald felt a chill all over his body. Nicholas had broken into the Abyss world because he wanted to win the war, but Han Jin wanted to annihilate the entire demon race. Han Jin's actions came one after another. If he had reacted a little slower just now, who knew how many elite warriors would have been swallowed by that terrifying sea of flowers? Was this still harassment? No, this was a fight to the death. A few days later, Nicholas and Ankiel stood on a small hill, gazing at a towering city in the distance. This is Grey Valley City, right? Why does it look a little strange? Ankiel frowned her beautiful eyebrows slightly and said with some doubt. According to Han Jin, Grey Valley City was close to the Demon Mountain, and was the most prosperous city in the Abyss world. But the huge city in front of them did not have any trace of prosperity. The tall city gates were tightly shut, and the city walls were densely packed with abyssal warriors. Although they were far away, Ankiel could still see the extremely nervous expressions on the abyssal warriors' faces. There were countless holes on the city wall, and from each hole, there was an arrow with a cold glint. They were like ferocious beasts that only wanted to devour people. Occasionally, A flying magical beast would recklessly fly over the city wall, but it would immediately be shot into a hedgehog by several arrows that soared into the sky. If Anchiel flew into the sky, she would be surprised to find that countless evil eyes and medusas were gathered on the crisscrossing streets of the city, including the roofs on both sides of the streets. Chapter 553. There was no sound in the huge Grey Valley city, and the atmosphere was so heavy that it was depressing. So many abyssal races had gathered together, but there was no sound at all. There was not even the slightest friction between their bodies. It was as if they had not moved since they stood there. No matter how one looked at it, this was a city that was armed to the teeth. It was just that the eerie silence had covered the city with a layer of lifeless gray. It was like an ancient beast that was about to enter its twilight years, silently waiting for the arrival of the last moment. "Don't tell me Donald wants to have a decisive battle with us here?" Nicholas stroked his chin gently, his gaze falling on a tall spire in the middle of the city. There was an abyssal demon holding a scythe standing on every floor of the spire. It seemed that there was something important in the spire that needed to be protected. Or rather, there was a person of high status there. The ring that Han Jin had given to Anchiel was tied to her fair wrist with a silk thread. Anchiel gently stroked the metallic luster of the ring with her fingertip. There was obviously a special reason why Grey Valley City had such a huge lineup. What she could not figure out was that Donald should know better than anyone else that these low-level abyssal warriors would not be able to harm a powerhouse of her level even if there were 10 times more of them. In the face of a powerful domain, these seemingly strong abyssal warriors could not change their fate of being cannon fodder. Anchiel could even feel that Grey Valley City was emitting a strong will to die from the inside out. A strange thought suddenly appeared in her mind. The strange situation in front of her seemed to be related to Han Jin in some way. "What are you thinking about?" Nicholas asked curiously when he saw Anchiel's thoughtful expression. "I'm thinking that Grey Valley City should not be like this. It's not surprising that Donald would make such arrangements knowing that we were coming, although it's not very effective." Nicholas laughed, not taking the abyssal warriors on the city wall seriously at all. "That's the strange part. I always thought that Donald would be waiting for us at the Demon Mountain. After all, that's their home ground. Hearing you say that, I also feel that it's a little strange." Nicholas stretched his body exaggeratedly. As his body stretched, the bones all over his body cracked. But so what? This trash can't change anything. Nicholas had every right to say that. In front of his starry sky domain, there was no difference whether it was the strong minotaurs or the agile hellhounds. As long as they entered his domain, there was only death waiting for them. "But the demons have enough cannon fodder to provide cover," Anchiel said. "It doesn't matter. Those low-level warriors can't harm us at all, can they?" When he made the decision to enter the abyss with Han Jin, he was already mentally prepared to face the fierce battle that was about to break out, and the addition of Anchiel greatly increased his confidence. If Nicholas and Han Jin were to face Donald, who led hundreds of abyssal demons, and were likely to be at a disadvantage, then Anchiel would become a bargaining chip that could change the situation. It was not as simple as 2 + 1. There was no sunrise or sunset in the world of the abyss. Under the cover of the boundless dark sky, Nicholas and Anchiel's figures appeared somewhat frail. The two of them patiently stood on the mound, looking at the similarly quiet Grey Valley City in the distance. After an unknown period of time, the ring on Anchiel's wrist suddenly lit up and emitted a soft light. "Seems like he found us." Anchiel smiled from the bottom of her heart. She admired Han Jin's courage very much. There had never been anyone who dared to enter the Demon Mountain alone before, and perhaps there would never be another in the future. Upon hearing Anchiel's words, the expression on Nicholas' face immediately became complicated. In terms of the overall situation, Nicholas sincerely hoped that Han Jin could return safely. That would greatly increase their chances of winning the next battle. But when he learned that Han Jin had really done this, Nicholas could not help but feel a strong sense of crisis in the depths of his heart, and a thick murderous intent filled his heart. As if affected by Nicholas' aura, the surrounding wind became stagnant. "What do you want to do?" Ankiel noticed Nicholas' abnormality, and the smile on her face gradually turned cold. Nicholas met Ankiel's gaze without yielding an inch. After a while, a cynical smile suddenly appeared at the corner of his mouth. He shrugged and said, "I'm a little conflicted." Ankiel, who was smart, naturally understood Nicholas' subtext. She looked at Nicholas vigilantly. "I hope you can stay rational." "Yes, rational." Nicholas sighed. "Damn rational. I've been thinking, is the biggest enemy Donald or Raphael? Can you give me an answer?" Nicholas' straightforwardness stunned Ankiel. In fact, everyone knew the answer to this question. In terms of individual combat ability, Han Jin, who had teleportation and ground guardian, was obviously much more difficult to deal with than Donald. Moreover, Han Jin had 2 lives. Since Donald and hundreds of abyssal demons could not hold Han Jin back, then even if the 2 of them attacked together, they would only be able to injure Han Jin. It was completely impossible to kill him. What did it mean to have an enemy who could never be killed? Ankiel could understand where Nicholas' murderous intent came from, but she could not tolerate it. "You shouldn't be asking me this question." Ankiel's gaze was as sharp as a blade. "At least, we all live under the same sky. With your wisdom, you should be able to make the right choice." "That's right." Nicholas sighed again. "Actually, what I want to say is, Ankiel, you're really different from the dragons. If it's possible, I'd like to be friends with you forever." "Friends?" Ankiel could not help but be startled. "We can enter the abyss together and fight side by side. Aren't we friends?" Nikolai shrugged his shoulders and fell silent for some reason. Nicholas's meaning was very straightforward. He hoped to be friends with Ankiel. This had nothing to do with the dragons. He only needed Ankiel's personal friendship. However, Ankiel was obviously pretending to be confused. Her "we" naturally included Han Jin. Otherwise, there was no need to emphasize that they had entered the abyss together. At this point, there was no point in continuing. Ankiel would never change her neutral position. In fact, it was precisely because of Ankiel's existence that Han Jin and Nicholas would cooperate. Otherwise, if 2 of them joined forces to squeeze out the other, the isolated one would definitely choose to leave. Finally, a streak of purple light appeared on the horizon, shooting towards Nicholas and Ankiel. "Too cool." Nicholas crossed his arms in front of his chest. His words surprised Ankiel. Based on her understanding of Nicholas, he was not someone who liked to praise his opponent, even if the opponent was his comrade at this moment. Could it be that this guy is worried that Donald won't be able to discover him? As expected, Nikolai's next sentence confirmed Ankiel's guess. "Why can't he be as low-key as I am?" Nicholas had a serious expression on his face. "You are indeed very low-key." Ankiel did not even look at Nicholas. She said in a bad mood, "The church has already been destroyed by your low-key actions. Perhaps you can be even more low-key." This was blatant mockery. Nicholas did not expect Ankiel to be so direct. He was stunned for a long time before a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "Interesting. I actually saw a believer who is even purer than Jed's." "Believer? Are you talking about me? Are you speaking up for the church?" Nicholas said softly. In fact, when faced with Donald's pressure, he had thought more than once about how the situation in the Grand Light Empire would change if the Church of the Unsetting Sun still existed. The Knights of the Light who fought to the last breath, the High Priests who used their bodies to protect the unsetting Sun Mountains and the Holy Temple, would definitely release powerful combat power in the face of the invasion of the Abyss world. At least he would not have to take the risk alone. However, Nicholas was not someone who was willing to regret the past. He would also not admit his mistake. "Do you know?" Nicholas continued, Even Jed's, that honest man, has always maintained an unyielding attitude towards the dragon race. As a member of the dragon race, how could you treat the holy sea? Ankiel opened her mouth, but didn't say anything. After a long silence, she said softly, "No matter how dissatisfied you are with the holy sea, it can't be a reason to destroy it. We are all children of this world, and we should learn to tolerate and give in to each other." Lord Nicholas, have you realized that you are too greedy? Perhaps in your eyes there are only two types of life in this world. One is obedient and the other is disobedient. This time, it was Nicholas's turn to be silent. His expression became very strange. After a while, Nicholas said slowly, "This should not be the legendary Ankiel, he. What should I be like?" Nicholas did not answer and only changed the topic. "The Abyss warriors are also children of this world. You should tolerate them as well. Why did you enter the Abyss world with us?" "Because they want to destroy us." Ankiel shook her head. "When I say tolerance, I do not mean not fighting back or retorting. When I say modesty, I do not mean to turn people into lambs." At the end of her sentence, Ankiel suddenly laughed. "What are you laughing at?" Nicholas asked curiously. "I once met a very interesting young man and accompanied him for a while." Ankiel's beautiful eyes slowly narrowed, as if she was recalling something. "At that time, I asked him the same question as you did. Since he said that he had to learn tolerance, why did he have to kill those opponents? And he answered as you did." "Yes." Ankiel nodded. "It has been many years, but I still can't forget his shadow. Especially, I can't forget those eyes. They were clear like spring water, gentle like moonlight, full of wisdom, as if they could penetrate the soul." "He knew your identity?" "No, he was a fool." "You just said that his eyes were full of wisdom. How could it be?" Nicholas was really confused. In some areas, his talent is unimaginable, but in other areas, he becomes dull. For example, as an adult in his 20s, he doesn't know how to take care of himself. A few months before I left, he even fell seriously ill and left behind an incurable illness. Actually, that could have been avoided. "Why did you leave?" Nicholas asked as he pondered. He could see that the young man Ankiel spoke of had a deep relationship with her. Moreover, to be able to receive such an evaluation from Ankiel, that young man's name would definitely shake the world in the future. He had just recovered from his illness when he accidentally saw himself in the mirror. He realized that he had aged a lot in just a few days. His face was pale and haggard. Then, he saw me. Then he asked me why my appearance hadn't changed even though we've known each other for 5 or 6 years. Ankiel said softly, "I knew it was time for me to leave." "Just because of that?" "His strength is improving very quickly. It won't be long before he can sense my power, so—" "I know who you are talking about. Emperor Lando." Emperor Lando was the founder of the empire that had collapsed more than 200 years ago. According to historical records, although Emperor Lando had many concubines, he had never had an empress in his life. Perhaps it was because of Ankiel in front of him. "You guessed wrong." Ankiel smiled. "Let's not talk about this anymore. Raphael will be here soon." Apparently, the people of Grey Valley City had also noticed Han Jin's figure. Countless eyes were fixed on the purple light in the sky, but no one made any moves. The city was still as silent as death. The only thing that had changed was that a tall figure had appeared at the top of the towering spire in the middle of the city. From Nicholas and Ankiel's perspective, the figure seemed to have become one with the ink-black dome above. Although they were far away, they could still feel a mountain-like aura coming from it. A moment later, Han Jin landed in front of Nicholas and Ankiel. "I'm not too late, am I?" Han Jin said with a smile. His armor was still neat and tidy, and there were no traces of battle. "You went to the Demon Mountain?" Ankiel asked. "Yes, I went to the Demon Palace to take a look." Han Jin nodded and looked at the figure at the top of the spire in the distance. He then smiled and said, "Those guys actually came faster than me. It seems that they are really angry." The Demon Palace? Both Enkiel and Nicholas were stunned. They both thought that Han Jin had gone to the Demon Mountain. In fact, if it was just to contain Donald, Han Jin's activities in the vicinity of the Demon Mountain would be enough. However, no one thought that Han Jin would dare to go so deep into the Demon Palace. The consequences of doing so would mean that the risk factor would be multiplied. Nicholas pursed his lips and looked at Han Jin's face, trying to determine whether Han Jin's words were credible. Enkiel also looked at Han Jin in disbelief. After a long time, he sighed. "Sir Raphael, I really didn't expect you to be able to escape unscathed from the Demon Palace. I have to say your magic is really amazing. How could it be so exaggerated?" "I still suffered some minor injuries in the end," Han Jin said calmly. Only then did Nicholas and Enkiel's expressions return to normal. This was the only way to explain it. If Han Jin could really enter and exit a heavily guarded place like the Demon Palace at will, it would mean that as long as Han Jin wanted to kill someone, that person wouldn't have any leeway to escape. "Are your injuries serious?" Although no injuries could be seen on Han Jin's body, after all, Han Jin had shouldered the greatest pressure by himself. Hence, Enkiel had to express his concern. "I'm fine now." At this time, Han Jin discovered that the figure at the top of the spire had disappeared. It seemed that the figure wanted to hide and wait for a fatal blow. "You just said that he was really angry? What does that mean?" Nicholas suddenly recalled Han Jin's words. "It wasn't easy for me to go to the Demon Palace. I had to do something," Han Jin said with a smile. "What did you do?" Nicholas and Enkiel asked in unison. "Something that should be done." Han Jin avoided the topic. "But I can guarantee that we will face a crazy Donald." Nicholas and Enkiel exchanged glances. The atmosphere was very quiet. They knew that Han Jin would never boast about such things. "Let's go and see what Donald has prepared for us." Nicholas's expression became serious. He took the lead and walked towards Grey Valley City. Enkiel followed closely behind. The two of them didn't choose to fly in the air. That would only make them an incomparably conspicuous target. Although it might not cause them any harm, the battle was imminent. Preserving a bit of strength might be the last weight in the balance. When Han Jin and the other two were about a kilometer away from Grey Valley City, they stopped at the same time. If they continued forward, they would enter Grey Valley City's attack range. At this time, the Abyss soldiers on the city wall also noticed the three of them. After a brief commotion, they calmed down again. Apart from tightening their grip on their weapons, they didn't do anything else. That tall figure appeared on the tower again. Even from a distance, Han Jin and the other two could feel that cold gaze. "That's Donald." Han Jin couldn't believe it. With Donald's intelligence, he shouldn't be stupid enough to expose himself first. "I don't think so." Due to the distance and the fact that the demons looked the same, Enkiel couldn't be sure. Nicholas pulled out his longsword with a backhand. A slightly evil smile hung on the corner of his mouth. "He is Prince Hani. But, who cares who he is, we'll just kill him." The three of them looked at each other and took action at the same time. Han Jin's figure disappeared from where he stood, while Nicholas strode toward Grey Valley City. His heavy footsteps made a thunderous sound on the ground and stirred up a cloud of dust behind him. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.